My name's Brian Rusk. I was 36 years old when it happened. I remember that weekend better than anything else in my life, and not for the right reasons. I was living in southern Ohio back then, in a small town near the Kentucky border. I'd been working construction for years and had finally taken a week off after finishing a long contract up north. I'd been planning a solo camping trip for a while, just a quiet weekend in nature. No phones, no noise, no people. I picked a state forest I hadn't been to before, Bear Creek State Forest. It wasn't as busy as Hocking Hills or some of the other parks in the area, and that was exactly what I wanted. Less traffic, less noise. I checked the maps and found a few backpacking sites off the trail. You had to hike in about 2 or 3 miles to reach them. There weren't many online reviews, but the few that existed said it was peaceful and remote. That sounded perfect. I packed light but smart tent, food, water purifier, some freeze-dried meals, basic first aid, knife, headlamp, and some extra batteries. I had a Garmin GPS too, one of those handheld models. It wasn't super new, but it worked. I double-checked all my gear the night before and left early that Friday morning. The drive was quiet, mostly back roads and winding hills. I pulled into the lot around 9 in the morning. There was only one other car there, an old dark blue SUV that looked like it hadn't been moved in days. Dust all over it. No stickers or tags on the windows. I didn't think much of it. People sometimes hike longer trails, leave their cars for days. I signed in at the trail register near the ranger post, which was empty. The book was barely used, only a few names scribbled in there over the last month. I added my name and the date, marked my destination as Campsite 4. I remember my handwriting being messy that day from the cold. It was late October, just starting to really feel like fall. The hike in was great, quiet, cool air, leaves everywhere. The trees had that golden red look to them, and every now and then I'd spot deer up the ridge. I didn't see another soul the entire time. After about 2.5 hours of hiking up and down a couple small ridges, I reached the site. It was tucked back just beyond a little creek, about 100 yards off the trail. There was a clearing for the tent and a fire ring made of rocks. No picnic table or anything fancy, just raw, peaceful wilderness. I set up my tent just before noon, gathered some firewood from the area, and filtered water from the creek. Everything was smooth. I remember sitting there for a while doing nothing, just sitting, listening to the birds and the breeze, feeling my body settle down after months of noise. I made a small fire around 4 and cooked one of those freeze-dried pasta meals. After dinner, I hiked back up the trail a bit and watched the sun go down through the trees. It got dark quickly. Too quickly, actually. I had to use my headlamp on the way back. Still, it felt safe. Remote, but safe. That first night, I slept okay. Not great, but okay. I heard coyotes howling far off around 2 a.m., but they never got close. At some point, maybe around 4, I thought I heard a snapping branch. One of those quick cracks like when you step on something dry. I sat up in my bag and listened for a while, but nothing followed it. No footsteps, no animals, no more snaps. I told myself it was probably a branch falling. Happens all the time. Next morning, I had coffee and oatmeal. The air was colder, and there was a layer of frost on my tent's rainfly. My plan was to take a day hike down a different trail that looped around to an old fire road. I left my bigger pack behind and just took my small day bag. Brought a map, the GPS, some snacks, and my water gear. It was quiet again. I passed an old deer stand up in a tree at one point, which I marked on the GPS just for fun. By mid-afternoon, I was back at camp. Everything looked fine. Nothing disturbed. I collected more firewood and sat down with my boots off for a while. That was when I noticed the footprints. At first, I thought they were mine. I'd walked down by the creek earlier that morning, filling up water and rinsing out my pot. But these weren't mine. They were deeper, longer strides, and they came from a different direction. from the woods. They came toward the camp, not away from it. I followed them a few steps. They curved behind my tent, stopped for a bit right behind it, then disappeared into the thicker trees west of the creek. I felt a tightness in my chest. It was too late in the season for this to be a ranger or some casual hiker, especially way off the main trail. I hadn't seen anyone since I arrived. No voices, no crunching boots, no signs of people. Just those footprints, clear in the muddy leaves. I walked a wide circle around the area, maybe a quarter mile out, just looking. I didn't see anyone. No tents. No other signs. But now I was on edge. Every little noise got my attention. Every woodpecker tap sounded like a boot step. I told myself again it could have been a hunter. Maybe they just passed through, saw the camp, and left. But that didn't explain why they stopped behind my tent, or why they didn't announce themselves, or why I hadn't heard them. I stayed close to camp that evening, cooked another meal, this time barely touching it. Fire burning low, I kept my knife out and my light nearby. I didn't sleep that night. I laid there with my ears wide open. Leaves rustled outside now and then, and once, just once, I heard something walk past, slow and steady. I didn't move, just laid there staring up at the dark inside of the tent. It didn't stop, didn't come closer, just kept walking off into the trees. When the sun came up, I packed fast. I wanted out. I didn't even make breakfast. I just shoved everything in my pack, stomped out the fire, and started hiking back. But it wasn't the trail I came in on. I knew where I was going, or at least I thought I did. My GPS was glitching. It would point one direction, then shift wildly the other way. I followed the trail markings instead, the faded blue blazes on the trees. After maybe an hour, the trail just stopped. There wasn't a downed tree, no landslide or washout. It just ended. No more blazes, no more worn path. I backtracked and tried to find the last known marker. I found it, then saw what looked like another blaze a few dozen feet off to the side. I followed that. It wasn't a blaze. It was just paint, old and peeling, from some logger's mark. I kept moving, figuring I could follow the terrain north and loop back toward the lot. But the ridges all started to look the same. The sun was up high now, and I started sweating. I checked the GPS again. Still spinning, no signal. I tried my phone, 1 bar, no data. Then I saw the tarp. It was maybe 30 yards out, half buried behind a fallen tree. Blue plastic, old and sun-bleached. I walked over to it slowly. There were beer cans around and a ripped-up sleeping bag. The tarp covered a shallow pit, dug into the side of a hill, maybe to block wind. Looked like someone had been using it to sleep there. But what bothered me most was the knife stuck in a tree nearby. Not like someone forgot it. It had been driven into the bark, deep, almost angry. And next to it, a small animal skull hung from a piece of fishing line. I don't know if it was for decoration or intimidation, but I didn't stay to find out. I turned and started heading the opposite way. That's when I heard someone yell. A single word. Far off, but not far enough. My body froze. Then I ran. I don't know how far or how long. My legs felt like rubber. I tripped more than once, scraped my hands, lost my water bottle. Eventually, I came across the old fire road I'd seen on the map. I followed it fast, almost stumbling down the hill. After nearly an hour of moving that way, I saw the edge of the ranger station clearing. The SUV was still there. No one else. I didn't even go to the trail register. I just got in my truck and drove until I hit cell signal again. I didn't report it right away. I was too wired, too unsure if I'd imagined parts of it. But the next day, I called the ranger office and left a message. I told them the rough coordinates of that tarp and what I saw. They never called me back. I checked online a week later. The trail was marked, closed due to maintenance. That was it. No news reports, no missing person alerts. Just gone. I haven't gone camping since. I still hike sometimes, but only in busy places with other people around. I double-check my GPS. I carry a personal locator beacon now, and I don't go off-trail, ever. That weekend changed something in me. I don't know who was out there. I don't know what they wanted, but I know I wasn't supposed to be near that tarp. And I know someone else was watching me the whole time. It was early October 2021 when I finally got a few days off work. I'd been working long shifts at a repair shop in Boise, Idaho. I was 31, living alone, no kids, not much family left except a few cousins I didn't talk to much. I wanted to spend my break outdoors, far from the noise, the people, the machines, just air, trees, and the quiet. I picked a place I'd never been before, a long hiking trail near the Payette National Forest, a few hours north of the city. The locals called it the Summit Cut Loop. It wasn't on many maps anymore, and I only heard about it from an older guy who came into the shop one day for a tire rotation. Said the trail was beautiful but tough, with very little traffic. That's what sold me on it, no people. I packed light but smart. Sleeping bag, tent, water filter, dry food, compact stove, flashlight, lighter, first aid kit, compass, and an old army knife I'd had since I was a teenager. I didn't bring a gun. I don't hunt and never felt the need to carry. I figured I'd be gone 3 days, maybe 4, depending on how long I wanted to stick around. I drove up early in the morning, parked near a faded wooden sign that had the trail name carved into it, and checked the weather one last time on my phone. Clear skies all week. Good enough. I left the car around 8 a.m. and started walking. The trail started wide and open, with yellow leaves falling around me like snow. The air smelled clean and cold. It felt like the kind of quiet you don't get in the city, where even silence has a sound. I didn't see a single person for the first several hours, which was exactly what I wanted. By late afternoon, I'd covered maybe 10 miles. I found a small clearing near a stream and set up camp. I boiled water, made some instant rice with dried vegetables, and sat on a log until it got too cold to stay out. Then I crawled into my sleeping bag and listened to the wind. That first night was peaceful. I slept hard and woke up before the sun. I had a little instant coffee, packed up my gear, and kept going. The trail got narrower and rougher, climbing into thicker forest. Fallen trees blocked the path in a few places, and I had to detour around them. I saw a couple of deer, heard woodpeckers, and saw fresh scat that looked like it belonged to a black bear. But I wasn't too worried. I made noise as I walked, enough to let anything nearby know I was around. Around noon, the trail split. One part seemed newer, worn by recent hikers heading up a steeper incline. The other path was older, barely there, buried under leaves and branches. My map didn't show the split. I remembered the guy at the shop saying something about a shortcut that ran along a ridge, gave you better views. I figured that was the older path. I took the older path. That was the first real mistake. After an hour, the trail was almost gone. I kept going, figuring I'd rejoin the main loop eventually. My GPS app lost signal around then, so I switched to the compass. I tried to keep going north-northeast like the map suggested, but the trees grew tighter, and the ground got rocky, uneven, and harder to walk on. I stopped seeing any signs of old trail at all. By the time I realized I might be lost, it was already getting dark. I didn't panic. I'd been hiking alone for years and knew that freaking out only made things worse. I set up camp again in a small dip between hills, ate some crackers and beef jerky, and wrote down my position in a small notebook using my compass bearings. I planned to backtrack in the morning. That second night was different. Couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard something in the woods. Not animals, not wind, something else. Like soft, slow movement, just outside the ring of my flashlight beam. A couple times I sat up and shined the light all around, but saw nothing. I told myself it was just nerves, the cold, maybe a porcupine or a raccoon, but I didn't sleep more than a few minutes at a time. When I woke up at dawn, I found something I hadn't noticed before. There were boot prints near my tent. Not mine. I wear size 11 hiking boots. These were smaller. Size 9 maybe. The tread was different too, flatter, older looking. Like work boots. I couldn't tell how many there were, but I could see them clearly in the damp soil about 10 feet away, near the edge of camp. They hadn't been there the night before. I was sure of it. I didn't eat breakfast. I packed fast and started back in the direction I thought I came from. I couldn't find my old footprints. I tried to follow the same slope, the same light between the trees, but nothing looked right. I walked all day without finding the trail. By late afternoon, I was deeper into the woods than I wanted to be, surrounded by tall pine trees that blocked out most of the sky. Everything started to look the same. I was tired, dehydrated, and sore. My left knee had started aching, probably from stepping wrong on a rock earlier that day. I found a small overhang near some boulders and decided to stop there for the night. I didn't build a fire. I didn't want to attract anything or anyone. That night, I kept my knife in my sleeping bag. I didn't sleep, not even a minute. I heard footsteps, not animals, not birds or squirrels or deer. Footsteps, slow, measured, heavy enough to sound human but not running, just moving around the edge of my camp. And breathing. I didn't move. I didn't unzip my bag or grab my light. I just laid there, knife in hand, waiting. The sounds went on for maybe 20 minutes, maybe longer. Then nothing. When morning came, I found more prints. This time they circled the camp. I knew then that someone was out there, following me, watching me, maybe even walking parallel during the day. I didn't eat. I just drank a little filtered stream water, repacked, and kept walking. I didn't know where I was going. I just moved east, hoping to hit a road or a trail or anything. The forest began to thin out after a few hours. That gave me hope. But then I started seeing things that didn't belong. Rope tied around a tree, frayed and gray, looked like it had been there for a long time. An old tin can hanging from a branch by a string. Empty, rusted, no label. Then a jacket, just hanging on a nail hammered into a tree. A green canvas jacket with no sleeves. I kept going. A little while later, I found the first sign of real trouble. It was a campsite, but not like mine. No tent, just a bunch of tarps stretched between trees. Torn, sun-faded. A fire pit filled with old bones, maybe deer, maybe something else. Hard to tell. There were clothes scattered around the ground. Jeans, a shirt, socks. All worn, all dirty, stiff with age. And something worse. Camera. I picked it up. No battery. Just a cracked screen and a memory card slot. No way to check it out here. Next to it was a wallet. Moldy, half-eaten by bugs, but still had an ID inside. A guy named Colin Masters, from Twin Falls, age 27. Expiration date on the license, 2016. I backed away and kept walking. I didn't want to be anywhere near that camp. By nightfall, I found a dry patch near a large tree and made a small shelter out of my tarp. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I kept my knife in hand and stared into the dark. That night, I heard something again. Not just footsteps, a snapping branch, then another, closer this time. I stayed completely still. Whoever it was didn't come into the camp, but they stayed just far enough to let me know they were there, watching, waiting. When dawn came, I left again. No food, no water, just walking. My body was giving out, muscles stiff, head pounding, lips cracked. I had to keep stopping every hour to rest. Around midday, I found what looked like an old ATV trail, deep grooves in the dirt. It gave me some hope, so I followed it. 2 hours later, I saw a fence, barbed wire, running in both directions. It didn't matter. It was man-made. It meant I was near something. I followed it south until I hit a gate. Locked but climbable. I got over it and kept walking. Eventually, I found a dirt road and a cabin. It looked abandoned at first. Broken windows, moss on the shingles, grass 2 feet high. But smoke was coming from the chimney. I didn't go near it. Instead, I stayed low, circled wide, and kept following the road until I found another gate. This one open, and beyond it, a gravel path that led to a small fire station. I was safe. The ranger who found me said I'd come out nearly 12 miles south of the trailhead. They gave me water, food, and checked my vitals. I didn't tell them everything, just said I got lost and wandered for 3 nights. I left out the footsteps, the campsite, the old ID. When they gave me my phone back after charging it, I pulled out the memory card from the camera and slid it in. It had over 80 photos. Only a few showed people. A man, maybe in his 30s, with a thick beard and a dirty flannel shirt. Some of the pictures were blurry. In some, he was just standing in the woods, watching someone. In a few photos, it looked like he was dragging something. I gave the card to the ranger. I don't know what they did with it. I never went back to that forest again. I moved 6 months later, took a job in Oregon. Still work with my hands, but I haven't gone camping since. Sometimes I still think about the trail, the broken camp, the boots circling my tent, and I wonder how many others went off the path and never came back. I was 34 when I decided to go on a solo camping trip in northern England. It was late September 2016, a bit past the peak season, but I wanted the peace and quiet that came with the off time. I'd been through a tough few months: work stress, breakup, a recent fallout with a close friend. So I figured a few nights out in nature would help me reset. I didn't want a crowded campground or anything organized, just a quiet patch of land where I could switch off and breathe for a while. I chose a spot not far from the Lake District, but far enough off the main paths that I wouldn't run into many hikers. I found it on an old hiking forum. A guy had written about a flat, grassy clearing near an abandoned railway tunnel just outside a small village called Barleywell. From what I could gather, the area had been overlooked by most campers because it was a bit of a pain to get to and there was no signage. But I liked that. I packed my gear into my old silver Ford Transit van, brought enough food and water for 4 days, and left on a Thursday morning. It was a gray day, but the forecast promised a few dry, chilly nights ahead. I reached the edge of Barleywell around midday. It was one of those tiny countryside villages where most houses looked untouched since the 70s. I passed a pub, a mechanic's shop, and a boarded-up convenience store before turning onto a narrow lane lined with dry stone walls and overgrown brambles. There were no signs pointing toward the old railway, so I relied on screenshots of the directions I'd saved from the forum. Eventually, the asphalt gave way to gravel and then just packed dirt. I followed it slowly for another 10 minutes, heart thumping with excitement every time my tires slipped in the mud or knocked against a rock. At the end of the trail, the land opened up. I stopped the van at the edge of a clearing. It was perfect, just as described. A wide space surrounded by pine trees, soft grass underfoot, and about 100 meters away, a dark mouth of a railway tunnel half collapsed and covered in moss. It was quiet. The only sounds were wind rustling the trees and the occasional crow cawing overhead. No other cars.
No litter.
No signs anyone had camped there in ages. I parked the van facing the woods so that my back doors would open toward the clearing. I kept everything minimal: one-man tent, sleeping bag, propane stove, folding chair, and a couple of coolers. After setting up the tent, I went on a short walk just to get my bearings. The trees around were dense but not impassable. The tunnel, though, made me pause. It was bigger than I expected, probably used by freight trains decades ago. You couldn't see more than 5 feet inside it. I didn't plan on going near it at night, just admired the history of it in passing and walked on. That first night was peaceful. I made a hot meal on the stove and ate it by the van, listening to the owls and watching the trees sway. No reception out there, so I read from a paperback I'd brought and turned in around 10. It was cold, but I'd packed for worse. I slept better than I had in weeks. The second day started off great. I went for a long walk through the woods, found an old crumbling stone wall buried under vines, maybe part of a farm boundary from years ago. I took photos of mushrooms and weird-looking plants, boiled water from a stream with my filter kit just to try it out, and spent the afternoon sketching in my notebook. But around 4 in the afternoon, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. I was back at the clearing when I saw a set of boot prints in the soft earth near the side of my van. I always walk in trail shoes with a very distinctive pattern on the soles, wide tread, very angular. These prints were different, bigger, rounded heel, flat sole, definitely a boot of some kind. I looked around and didn't see anyone. The trees stood still, windless. I walked in a widening circle from the van, but couldn't find any more prints leading to or away. Just that one set. It was as if someone had stepped out of the woods, stood there, and then vanished. I told myself it could have been from earlier. Maybe I didn't notice them yesterday, but I'd cleared the ground around the van myself and set up the chair nearby. I would have seen them. I tried not to think about it too much, but something shifted in me that afternoon. I wasn't totally relaxed anymore. I went back to the van and moved the chair, scanned the woods more often, listened harder. The feeling didn't go away. That night I didn't sleep as well. Around midnight, I heard soft snapping sounds, twigs breaking, maybe 10 meters from the tent. I stayed still. My flashlight was next to me, but I didn't turn it on. I waited, heart pounding so loud I thought whatever was outside could hear it. The sounds continued for a few minutes, then stopped. I stayed awake for hours after that, drifting in and out of shallow sleep. Morning came, and I emerged from the tent stiff and cold. I walked around the campsite. There were no new prints, but my chair had been moved. Not a lot, just rotated maybe 90 degrees, now facing away from the van toward the woods. I hadn't touched it since the night before. It wasn't the wind. The chair was low and heavy enough that it'd take a nudge. I was shaken. I almost packed up right then, but part of me didn't want to run. I still had one full day left, and I thought if I stayed alert and careful, it'd be fine. I decided to sleep inside the van that night instead of the tent. I moved everything back in, sleeping bag, stove, coolers, and locked the doors from the inside. I figured that would be enough to make me feel safe. By evening, the air had dropped 10 degrees and the woods looked darker than before. I barely touched my dinner. I kept the lights off in the van and stayed under the blanket with a headlamp on, reading and checking the windows every 5 minutes. Around 11 p.m., I heard footsteps again, this time on the gravel behind the van. Slow, deliberate. Crunch, pause, crunch. I turned off the headlamp and slid quietly onto my stomach, peeking up through the back windows. There was a man standing near the edge of the clearing, just beyond the tunnel's entrance. I could barely see him, but enough to know he wasn't a hiker. He wore something like a dark trench coat, tall still, not moving, just watching. He didn't carry a flashlight, and he didn't speak or make noise, just stood there. I waited, breath shallow, not moving a muscle. After maybe 10 minutes, he walked back toward the tunnel and disappeared behind a tree. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even close my eyes. I kept listening, kept watching, kept waiting for more sounds. Nothing came. By sunrise, I was out of there. I didn't pack up properly. I threw the tent in the van half folded, left trash I'd normally carry out, didn't even check to make sure I had everything. I just got in, locked the doors, and drove until I hit pavement again. I didn't stop until I reached a petrol station an hour away, where I sat in the car park, hands shaking. I didn't report it. What would I say? That I saw a man standing in the woods and some footprints? That my chair got moved? Nothing illegal had happened. But I know what I felt. That I was being watched, hunted even. That someone knew I was alone out there and came closer than I ever want to think about again. Weeks later, out of curiosity, I searched online for anything about the area. I found one forum thread from a guy back in 2007 who'd camped near Barleywell and mentioned seeing someone near the tunnel at night. No details, no follow-up. Just a single post, never replied to. I haven't been camping alone since. I still love the outdoors, but only in groups now, and never too far from help. And I've sold the van. Something about sleeping in it again makes my skin crawl. Every time I think about it, I remember those slow footsteps, that figure in the trench coat, and the way the chair was turned, like someone had been sitting there watching me sleep. I learned something important on that trip. The woods are peaceful, sure, but they're also lonely, and sometimes when you're too far out, you're not as alone as you think. It was in late October of 2016, somewhere just outside of Franklin, North Carolina, when my brother Kyle and I decided to go camping up in the Nantahala National Forest. I was 26 at the time, and Kyle was 24. We hadn't done a proper camping trip together since we were teenagers, and both of us were burnt out from our jobs. He was working long hours in construction, and I had just gotten through a string of overnight shifts at the warehouse I worked at. We both needed a break. We had a long weekend off, and with the fall weather rolling in, the timing felt perfect. We packed up early on a Friday morning. The sky was overcast, but the forecast had only called for scattered showers later in the night, so we didn't think much of it. We loaded up Kyle's old 4Runner with our tent, 2 backpacks full of clothes and food, a cooler, a couple of knives, headlamps, a tarp, and some emergency supplies. We didn't bring much else, just the basics. The plan was simple. Hike a couple miles into the forest, find a quiet place away from the main trails, set up camp, spend 2 nights, and head back Sunday morning. We drove about 40 minutes out of Franklin, then turned onto a narrow gravel road that climbed steeply into the forest. It twisted through thick trees and curved around drops with no guardrails. After about 20 minutes of slow, bumpy driving, we pulled off onto a clearing just big enough to leave the truck. We threw our packs on and started the hike. The air was cool and heavy, the kind of chill that sits low in your clothes and creeps in slowly. Everything smelled like wet leaves and pine. The trail was barely marked. We followed an old forestry road that had clearly been used at some point, but now it was mostly overgrown with tall grass and fallen branches. Every so often, we stopped to check our surroundings and make sure we weren't circling back. It was mostly uphill, and even though the sky was still gray, we were sweating through our shirts from the effort. After about 2 hours, we found a good spot. It was off the trail, tucked behind a small ridge with thick trees all around. There was a flat area covered in pine needles and soft dirt, and a little drop-off that overlooked a dry creek bed about 10 feet down. It was quiet, no other campsites, no signs of people. We set up the tent under a few tall firs and tied the tarp between 2 trees in case it rained. The fire pit was just a ring of rocks we built ourselves. By the time the sun started going down, we had everything set. We cooked some canned chili on a little camp stove, ate in silence, and leaned back against a log, listening to the trees groan in the wind. The quiet was deep. No cars, no voices, not even birds once it got dark. Just the wind brushing the branches and the occasional cracking of wood shifting in the cold. I remember feeling calm in a way I hadn't in years. No phone service, no work, just me and my brother out in the woods like we used to be when we were kids. Around 10 that night, it started to rain. Light at first, just a soft tapping on the tarp overhead, but it picked up fast. Within half an hour, It turned into a steady, cold downpour. We crawled into the tent and zipped up the rainfly. We were both dry, but I could hear the rain hammering down harder than I expected. The kind that hits in sheets and bounces off the ground. The tarp outside flapped in the wind, and every now and then I could hear a branch crack somewhere nearby. We laid there for a while, just listening. The tent lit up in pulses from our small battery lantern. I had a hard time falling asleep, not from fear, just from how loud the rain had gotten. At one point, I reached over to check the seams of the tent. No leaks, but the ground under us felt like it was softening, like the earth was slowly turning to mud. Sometime after midnight, I heard a weird noise outside. It wasn't the rain. It was a different kind of sound. Sharp, like something snapping hard underfoot. Not a branch falling from above, but something heavy stepping on dry wood. Came from down near the creek bed. I froze for a second and looked over at Kyle. He had already propped himself up on his elbow and was staring at me. Neither of us said a word. We just listened. The noise came again. Another snap, followed by a dragging sound. Then silence. The rain was still falling hard, but there was definitely something moving out there. Something alive. My first thought was a deer or maybe even a bear, but it didn't sound like any animal I knew. The movements were slow, purposeful, like it was stepping carefully but still making a lot of noise. I reached into my bag and pulled out my headlamp and knife. Kyle did the same. We stayed like that for a few minutes. Lights off, knives in hand, just listening. Then another sound, this time closer, not even 50 feet away. It sounded like something brushing up against tree bark. Then another heavy step. The creek bed was only 10 feet down from where our tent sat, and the sound was now above it on our side, right near us. My heart was pounding. I didn't want to turn the light on and give away our position, but at the same time, I hated not knowing what was out there. Kyle slowly unzipped the tent and leaned out just far enough to peek. A few seconds passed, and then he pulled back inside and gave me a look I won't forget. His face was pale and he looked genuinely freaked out. I leaned out and flicked on my headlamp just for a second, sweeping the trees. I didn't see anything, just darkness and rain pouring down in streaks. The beam cut through the mist but didn't catch any movement. I turned it off right away and pulled back inside. We sat there, knives in hand, soaked in sweat despite the cold. More noises followed. Scraping, slow shuffling, and what sounded like wet footsteps moving around the tent. Not circling, just slow, steady pacing. Then it stopped. For maybe 10 minutes, there was nothing but rain again. Just as I started to think it might have been a deer or even just the wind playing tricks on us, something hit the side of the tent. Not hard, but definite, like a hand brushing down the fabric. Just one long swipe, right along where Kyle was lying. He jerked back, and I turned my light on, shining it at the wall of the tent. No shadow, no silhouette, just the wet fabric sagging slightly. We didn't move, we just waited. The rain kept pounding, and the wind got louder, whistling through the trees like a scream. Eventually, whatever was out there moved off. We could hear the sounds getting more distant, branches moving, leaves crunching under something heavy. Then, nothing. After about an hour of silence, we both sat back. Neither of us spoke. We didn't go back to sleep. We just waited in silence until the sky started to lighten. The first light, we stepped outside. Everything was soaked. The ground around the tent was muddy and covered in small puddles. We checked the area around camp. A few broken branches, some smudged marks near the edge of the creek bed. They weren't prints exactly, but more like deep spots in the mud where something had stood for a while, heavy enough to leave dents. We packed up fast. No breakfast, no fire, just tore down the tent, stuffed everything into our packs, and got moving. The hike back was silent. Both of us kept checking behind us, stopping every few minutes to listen. The rain had let up by then, but the forest was still dripping, and the fog clung low to the ground. Every shadow felt alive. When we got back to the truck, we didn't say anything until we were halfway down the mountain. Cal finally looked over and just shook his head slowly. We never talked about what we saw or didn't see that night, but I know we both felt it. Something had been watching us. Something had gotten close. Too close. We never reported it. What would we say? We didn't see a face, didn't hear a voice. Just sounds and movements. But whatever it wasn't just some random animal. It moved like it knew we were there, like it had come to check on us. Maybe even wait. We never camped in that part of the forest again. Hell, we didn't camp together for a long time after that. When we did go again, it was always with more people and always somewhere familiar, somewhere close to home. That night in the rain, something reminded us how easy it is to disappear out there. How far the woods can go on without anyone hearing you scream. No fairy tale endings. No monsters or ghosts. Just the cold, real feeling of being hunted by something you couldn't see. And that's what still gets to me. Not knowing what it was. Just knowing it was real. It was in early October of 2022 when my boss, Rick, invited me to go on a camping trip with him and his stepsister, Amy. Rick was 45, a little rough around the edges, but a good guy. Amy was around 40, very independent and quiet. They grew up together after their parents remarried, but they didn't really seem that close now. I was 29 at the time, had been working under Rick for about 2 years, mostly helping him manage the warehouse for a shipping company in Northern Oregon. We weren't best friends, but I think he liked having someone younger around who didn't mind doing the heavier work. The trip wasn't anything formal. Rick just said he knew a spot near the Wallowa Mountains. Real remote, no official campsites, the kind of place hunters and old-timers used to go. He said it would be a chance to get the hell away from everything for a few days. At the time, I needed that. Work had been burning me out. I figured a quiet few days in the woods with a small group might actually be good. We left early on a Thursday morning. Rick drove his old Ford F-250, beat up but reliable. I followed behind in my own truck, a rusty Chevy that rattled when you hit 50 miles an hour. Amy rode with Rick. I had only met her once before, briefly at a company barbecue, and remembered her being polite but not very talkative. She packed light, same as Rick, just the basics. I brought my own tent, sleeping bag, a backpack full of essentials, and enough food for 4 days. The drive took almost 6 hours. Paved roads turned to gravel, and then gravel roads turned into rough dirt paths. Eventually, we pulled off at a small clearing surrounded by thick pine trees. There was a creek running nearby, and the whole place smelled like wet moss and pine needles. No other people for miles. No cell service either. We spent the first couple of hours setting up camp. Rick hammered down the tent stakes like he'd done it 1,000 times. Amy set up a small cooking area with a fold-out table and propane stove. I pitched my own tent a little ways off from theirs, close enough to feel part of the group but far enough for some privacy. It was already late afternoon by the time we finished, and the sun dipped low behind the trees. We made a simple dinner, beans and sausages heated on the stove. Afterward, we sat around a small fire, watching the flames crackle and listening to the sounds of the forest. The first night was calm. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the night sounds, the soft gurgle of the creek, the wind brushing through the trees, an owl hooting somewhere off in the distance. I fell asleep fast, the way you do when you're out in the open air, tired from working all day. The next morning, Rick wanted to explore the area. He had an old map, some hand-drawn thing he'd found years ago, that showed trails and landmarks not on any official maps. He talked about an old fire lookout tower somewhere deep in the woods, abandoned since the 70s. Amy didn't seem interested in hiking that far, so she stayed behind at camp. I went with Rick. We hiked for a few hours, cutting through dense trees and scrambling over fallen logs. The air was crisp and cool, with the smell of damp earth everywhere. We found the tower just before noon. It was a rotting wooden structure, maybe 50 feet tall, leaning slightly to one side. The ladder was missing half its rungs, and the wood was soft with rot. We didn't dare climb it. Just standing near it, you could feel how fragile it was. We ate a quick lunch, jerky and granola bars, then headed back to camp. Along the way, we noticed something weird. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just small signs, branches broken in strange ways, rocks piled neatly in odd little stacks. At one point, we found a shirt, dirty, faded, stuck high up in a tree like someone had thrown it there. Rick shrugged it off, said it was probably from some hunter or hiker years ago. Still, it put me on edge. I didn't like the idea of someone else being out here, especially someone careless enough to leave trash hanging around. When we got back to camp, Amy was sitting by the fire pit, reading a book. She said everything had been quiet, but there was something about the way she said it that didn't sit right with me. Like she wasn't sure if it really had been. That night was colder. I wrapped myself tighter in my sleeping bag, listening harder to the sounds outside. Around midnight, I thought I heard footsteps crunching through the brush. Slow, heavy steps. I held my breath, straining to hear. Maybe it was a deer, maybe a bear, but the steps stopped right outside my tent. I stayed frozen, not daring to move. After a minute, they started again, moving away, fading into the trees. The next morning, I told Rick what I thought I heard. He laughed it off, said I was probably half dreaming. I didn't push it. Amy didn't say anything, but I caught her giving me a look, like she believed me but didn't want to say it out loud. We spent the day fishing down at the creek. Caught a few small trout, enough for dinner. It was peaceful for a while. I started to relax a little, thinking maybe I had just imagined the footsteps. Maybe it really had been a deer. That night, everything changed. Started around 1 in the morning. I was half asleep when I heard something again, this time sharper, more deliberate. A twig snapping, a low grunt. I sat up, heart pounding. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and poked my head out. The fire was just a few embers now, glowing weakly. The woods beyond the clearing were pitch black, but something moved at the edge of the trees. A shadow, a tall figure, standing just inside the darkness. I ducked back into my tent, fumbling for the small hatchet I kept near my pack. I didn't know what to do. Yell? Run? I stayed put, trying to be as quiet as possible. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, I heard the figure moving away, heavy steps crunching on dead leaves. I waited another hour before I dared lay down again, but even then I didn't really sleep. When the sun came up, I checked around the camp. There were footprints in the soft dirt, not animal prints, Bootprints. Someone had been standing there, just watching us. I showed Rick. He frowned, suddenly not so casual anymore. Amy looked scared. Rick said it was probably some hiker, maybe a hunter passing through. But the look in his eyes told me he didn't believe that either. We decided to pack up and leave a day early. None of us wanted to stay another night. As we broke down camp, Rick noticed something else. His cooler, the one he kept padlocked shut, had been opened. Not broken into, opened. The lock was still there, but the cooler was empty. Every bit of food gone. Same with Amy's bag of dry goods. My own pack had been rummaged through too, though nothing big was missing. It was a clear message. Someone had been here, watching us, messing with us. We rushed through packing, barely talking, just wanting to get out of there. As we loaded up the trucks, I kept glancing at the trees, half expecting to see someone standing there again. The drive back was tense. Rick kept checking the rearview mirror like he expected someone to follow. Amy stared out the window, arms crossed tight over her chest. We made it back to town by late evening. When I finally got home, I locked every door and window, double-checked them twice. That night, I barely slept, every little creak of the house setting my nerves on edge. In the days that followed, I thought a lot about what had happened, about how someone could just slip into your camp at night, steal your food, stand outside your tent, and you might never even know they were there until it was too late.
No ghosts, no monsters.
Just people, real people who chose to make you feel powerless. I still work for Rick. We don't talk about that trip much. Amy doesn't come around the warehouse at all anymore. I don't blame her. After that night, none of us were the same. Something about being watched like that, being toyed with, knowing someone else was out there, someone who didn't care if you lived or died. It changes the way you see the world. I haven't been camping since, and honestly, I don't think I ever will again. I was 34 when I decided to take a solo camping trip in western Arkansas. It was the fall of 2019, early October, when the trees were just starting to change. I had some leftover vacation time and didn't feel like flying anywhere. I wanted something quiet, something isolated, away from people, phones, everything. I'd been working nonstop at a small repair shop I owned just outside of Shreveport, and this trip was supposed to be a chance to breathe a little. I picked a remote part of the Ouachita National Forest, near the Oklahoma border. Not many people camped where I was going, not because it was dangerous or restricted, but because it wasn't well known. I had stumbled across it while looking at old hiking forums. One guy mentioned a small clearing next to a narrow creek deep in the woods where you could pitch a tent and hear nothing but the forest for miles. That's exactly what I wanted. I packed light but smart. A 2-person tent, a compact sleeping bag, freeze-dried meals, a good hunting knife, some rope, fire starter, a small hatchet, and my old .38 revolver. I wasn't paranoid, but I didn't go out into the woods completely unarmed either. I'd also brought a GPS device, a solar battery pack, and a paper map just in case. I left the paved road by noon and drove along gravel and dirt tracks until the trail ended. From there, it was about a 4-mile hike to the spot the guy on the forum described. It wasn't marked, but I followed a thin game trail he mentioned, which cut through thick trees and sloped gently downhill. Took me about 2 hours to get there. When I reached the clearing, it was even better than I imagined. It sat in a natural dip between 2 ridges, and the creek, more like a wide stream, flowed calmly at the edge. There was a moss-covered rock slab perfect for sitting on. The ground was soft but dry, covered in pine needles. I could still hear a few insects buzzing and some birds deeper in the trees, but that was about it. No motors, no other people, not even a distant plane overhead. Just trees and quiet. I pitched my tent facing the creek, gathered some sticks and branches for a fire, and boiled some water for a bag of chili mac. I sat on the rock and ate slowly, staring out into the forest as the light started to shift into late afternoon. I didn't plan on doing much else that evening. After the fire died down, I climbed into my tent, zipped it up, and lay there listening to the creek until I drifted off. I woke up sometime after midnight. It was cold, colder than I thought it would be. I hadn't brought a heavy sleeping bag because the days had still been warm. I layered up with a hoodie and jacket, but I could still feel the chill in my feet. Outside the tent, the forest had that frozen stillness you only get in the deep hours of the night. No rustling leaves, no animals scurrying around. Just silence. I rolled over and tried to fall asleep again. Then I heard a sound. It was faint. A crunch, like someone stepping lightly on dry leaves. First, I figured it was a deer, maybe a raccoon, but it only happened once. Then it was quiet again. I lay there holding my breath, waiting. A few minutes passed. Another soft crunch, closer this time. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on, but kept it pointed at the tent floor. I didn't want to shine it around too early and spook a harmless animal, or make myself look like a target, just in case it wasn't an animal. My hand found the revolver near my pack and rested on it. More crunching, still slow, still light. Whatever it was moving carefully, not like a panicked or curious animal. It stopped maybe 30 feet from the tent, just out of flashlight range. I waited, no sound for maybe 10 minutes. Then I heard a single snap, like a branch being broken. Not big, maybe someone stepped on a small stick. I flicked the flashlight toward the sound and swept the beam quickly. Trees, bushes, nothing that I could see anyway. I unzipped the tent slowly and peeked out. The air was colder than before, and there was a faint smell of damp earth. I stepped out fully, flashlight in one hand, revolver in the other. I circled the tent slowly, shining the beam into the woods. No glowing eyes, no movement. After maybe 5 minutes, I climbed back in, zipped it up, and sat awake for an hour before lying down again. I finally drifted off sometime after 3 a.m. and woke with the sun in my face. Everything looked normal. My pack was untouched. No signs of tracks, no broken branches, nothing out of place. I tried to brush it off. Could have been a deer, maybe a curious raccoon that lost interest. Still, I stayed more alert during the day. I kept the revolver on my hip even when I went to the creek to rinse my face and fill my water filter bag. That afternoon, I hiked a bit up the ridge to get a better look around. It was clear and empty in all directions. No signs of people or other camps. I followed a small deer trail that looped back toward the clearing from another direction. It looked undisturbed, no fresh prints, no trash, no anything. When I got back, I made another fire, ate a bit, and kept the fire burning longer than the night before. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, that uneasy feeling returned, like I wasn't alone. I didn't see or hear anything strange yet, but my nerves were tight. I didn't go in the tent right away. I stayed sitting outside near the fire, scanning the trees every few seconds. The light faded. The wind picked up a little. It carried a smell like decaying wood, normal in the forest but stronger than earlier. It wasn't until close to midnight again when something happened. A sharp, deliberate crack echoed through the woods. Not a small twig this time. A real branch, thick one, the kind that snaps when you step on it hard. It came from deeper in the woods, maybe 50 or 60 feet to the east. I killed the fire quickly, crouched low, and pointed my flashlight in that direction. Nothing. Then I heard it again. Closer. Still off to the east, but maybe 20 or 30 feet this time. I crouched behind my tent, holding my breath, flashlight off, revolver tight in my hand. A few more minutes passed. No sound. Then, very slowly, something moved behind the trees just beyond my flashlight's reach. It was so faint I almost missed it. A shape, a dark figure, maybe human, maybe not. Not moving like an animal, though. Too smooth, too upright. I didn't call out. I didn't want to give away my position. I moved quietly into the trees in the opposite direction, circling wide, flashlight still off, using the moonlight. My boots were soft on the forest floor, and I tried to step only on soft patches of pine needles. I looped around and approached the back of my tent from the other side. That's when I saw it. A man, just a man, standing there near my tent, not moving. He had a hood up, hands in his pockets. He was facing the tent like he was waiting for me to come back. No light,
No bag. No gear.
just standing there. I raised the revolver and held my breath. I didn't want to shoot unless I had to. I watched him for almost 2 full minutes. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there in the dark. Then, without warning, he turned and walked silently into the trees. I waited another 5 minutes before moving. I didn't chase him. I packed everything in under 5 minutes, stuffed my sleeping bag into my backpack loose, shoved the tent in without folding it. I didn't care. I needed to get out. I hiked out in the dark using the GPS. Every few minutes I looked back, flashlight sweeping the trees. I didn't see him again. I made it to my car a little after 4 a.m. My legs were shaking from the hike, but I didn't stop. I threw my gear in the back, locked the doors, and drove. I didn't look back once. When I got home, I reported the incident to the park rangers. They took my statement and said they'd check it out, but they didn't find anything. No camps, no gear, no other cars on the old logging road. Nothing. They said it was probably a drifter, maybe someone living rough out there. But the way that man moved, the way he stood there like he was waiting, it didn't feel random. I haven't been camping alone since. I still go sometimes, but only with others and never that deep. I still think about that guy sometimes.
No flashlight. No gear.
No reaction when I saw him. Just quiet, deliberate presence. I don't know what he wanted, but I'm glad I didn't stay to find out. In October of 2016, I was 27 years old, living in a small town in northern Wisconsin called Eagle River. I worked construction back then, mostly roofing and small home remodel jobs, and I used to spend a lot of time by myself. I didn't have much family around, just an older brother who lived in Green Bay and a few coworkers who I wasn't very close with outside of work. I didn't date much either. I was pretty quiet most of the time, just preferred being alone. That fall, I got into this strange habit of camping in unusual places. Not the kind of places people usually go for camping, like lakes, forests, or campgrounds, but weird, forgotten spots. I don't know why it started. I think I just got tired of people. Even the woods near town started feeling crowded with all the hunters and hikers. So I started looking for spots where nobody went. One night, I slept in an abandoned grain elevator. Another time in a half-collapsed barn out near the edge of Forest County. And then, for whatever reason, I thought about trying a graveyard. Not one still in use, but one of those tiny ones you see while driving old back roads. Rusted gates, crumbling headstones, sometimes only 10 or 15 graves. Forgotten by everyone except the occasional drunk teenager. I had driven past one of these spots a bunch of times before, just outside a little ghost town called Sutherland. Nothing there anymore but the remains of a church and a general store with boarded windows. About 2 miles outside of town, there was a little fenced-in graveyard up on a slight hill. The headstones were all from the 1800s, maybe early 1900s at the latest. I'd stopped once to check it out in the middle of a drive, just to stretch my legs. I remembered the place was quiet, like really quiet. No cars, no animals, just a bunch of trees nearby and some barbed wire fence running around what used to be a pasture. So one Friday afternoon after work, I packed up my gear, loaded my old backpack with a small tent, my knife, a flashlight, 2 water bottles, and some jerky and trail mix. I left around 4:30 and drove for about 40 minutes until I reached the old gravel road that curved around the hill where the graveyard sat. I pulled off the road just enough to hide the car behind some overgrown brush and started walking up. The sun was low, gold light cutting through the bare trees. Most of the leaves had fallen already. I could hear the crunch of my boots on the dirt and broken twigs as I climbed. The graveyard came into view slowly, tucked behind a rusted black gate that sagged on its hinges. The fence was maybe 4 feet tall, completely covered in vines and rust. Some parts had fallen down. It wasn't even locked, just had a chain wrapped once around the gate and looped through itself. I stepped in. Inside, the graveyard wasn't much, maybe 30 graves total. Most of the stones were weathered and tilted. Some had sunk almost halfway into the dirt. A few had crumbled altogether. There was no real path, just tall grass and patches of moss. The trees were thin but tall, scattered around the edge. No real underbrush, just dead leaves. A low breeze moved through every once in a while, but it didn't make much noise. I picked a spot toward the back corner, away from the road, where there was a flat patch between two graves. One of the stones read Martha Ellen Birch, 1879 to 1904. The other was so worn I couldn't read it. I set up my tent between the two, making sure not to step directly on any of the graves. I wasn't trying to be disrespectful, I just wanted quiet. It was getting dark by the time I finished, and the air was getting cold. I slipped on my coat, ate some of the jerky, and leaned back against one of the flatter stones. I don't know how long I sat there, just watching the light fade through the trees. The stars came out little by little, and the temperature dropped fast. It was the kind of cold that bites into your fingers if you stay still too long. I didn't light a fire, didn't want to draw attention, just stayed in the dark with my flashlight off, listening. First, it was peaceful, completely silent except for the wind in the trees. But the longer I sat there, the more I started to notice the quiet wasn't normal. It was heavy, like the air had weight to it. No owls, no insects, no rustling of animals. Just my own breathing and the occasional snap of a branch in the distance. Every little sound felt sharp. Eventually, I climbed into my tent and zipped up, keeping my knife nearby just in case. I left my boots on. I always did that when I camped in places that made me uneasy, just in case I had to run. At some point, I drifted off. Not into deep sleep, just a half-awake kind of doze. Then I heard something, a slow, dragging sound outside the tent. Not footsteps, something sliding over the leaves, like a shovel or a heavy bag. I froze. I didn't move or breathe. My heart was pounding. I waited maybe a full minute. Then another sound, metal clinking. A soft tap, like something striking stone. Then silence. I stayed frozen for a long time. I thought maybe it was a deer or a raccoon, but something felt wrong. Animals don't drag things. I listened hard but didn't hear anything else. Still, I didn't move. Maybe 20 minutes later, I heard it again, this time closer to my tent. A soft, low scraping, like fabric over dirt. Then another tap of metal. That was enough. I slowly reached for the zipper and opened the flap just an inch. I peeked out. I couldn't see anything at first, just shapes in the dark. My eyes adjusted a little. There was movement, a shadow just at the edge of the trees. It was a person. I was sure of it. Too tall and slow for an animal. They were bent forward, dragging something heavy behind them. My breath caught in my throat. I stayed still. They stopped and crouched. I heard the sound again, metal on stone. Not loud, but distinct. They were doing something at one of the graves. I ducked back into the tent, heart racing. My brain went in every direction at once. Do I yell? Do I run? Do I wait? Then I heard something I'll never forget. The sound of earth being dug. Soft, deliberate shoveling. Not fast. Slow, like someone trying not to be noticed. One shovel full at a time. I couldn't move. My legs were locked. My brain told me to run, but my body said no. Eventually, I made a decision. I grabbed my flashlight, flipped the knife into my hand, and slowly opened the tent again. The figure was still there, still digging. I clicked the flashlight on and aimed it. The beam hit him square in the back. He turned, but I didn't see his face. Just a hood and the shape of a man, average build, pale hands. He didn't say anything, just stared. The thing he was digging next to wasn't an old grave. It was fresh. I saw the dirt piled to the side, the disturbed earth, the shape of a body-sized hole already halfway done. I bolted, didn't think, didn't speak, didn't look back. I just ran through the graveyard, down the hill, crashing through trees and brush, flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand. My boots slammed into roots and rocks. I scraped my arms on branches. I didn't stop until I hit the gravel road and spotted my car. I fumbled with the keys, got inside, and tore out down the road, gravel flying up behind me. I drove until I hit the highway, then kept going until I saw lights. I ended up at a gas station off Route 45, parked there, shaking, heart still pounding. I didn't tell anyone, not for a long time. I didn't want people thinking I was making it up or exaggerating. I hadn't seen a face. I hadn't gotten a plate number. I had nothing, but I never went back there. A few weeks later, I checked the local news just to see if anything showed up. Nothing did. No stories about graves disturbed, no missing persons. But I know what I saw. I know someone was digging out there that night, and I know it wasn't for fun. Whoever he was, he didn't expect anyone to be there. Just some forgotten graveyard off a back road in the middle of nowhere. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe the right place, because maybe I stopped something worse. That night changed how I camp, changed how I live. I still go into the woods sometimes, still spend nights alone. But I never go near graveyards. And I always trust that feeling in my gut when the quiet turns heavy. I was 33 when I took a solo camping trip in northern Idaho in the summer of 2017. I'd been working construction jobs for over a decade, most of them in hot cities, and I was burned out. I needed a break from the concrete, noise, and people, and I needed to be alone. Not in a cabin, not in a motel, but out in nature where I wouldn't have to hear car horns or phones buzzing. Just the sound of wind in the trees and maybe the crunch of dry grass under my boots. I chose a place called Dry Creek Ridge. It wasn't a tourist spot, not even marked on most online camping guides. I found it on an old hiking forum where some guy had posted about it 10 years ago. It was hard to find on the map, which was what I liked. Felt like a place I could disappear into for a while. I packed light but carefully. 1-person tent, a small axe, a decent hunting knife, 2 water filters, 6 freeze-dried meals, oatmeal packs, jerky, a first aid kit, a compass, matches, a headlamp, a flashlight, backup batteries, a solar charger, bear spray, and a .357 I kept for bears or whatever else I might run into. I'd hunted before, and while I wasn't afraid of the woods, I also didn't trust that being prepared always saved you. Nature doesn't care how ready you are. I left Boise early on a Thursday morning and reached the closest pull-off road to the trail around noon. It was just gravel and overgrown brush, no signs, no cell signal. I locked the truck, slung on my pack, and started walking east through the pines. The trail wasn't really a trail. It was more like a fading deer path that disappeared sometimes and reappeared 100 yards later. I kept the sun over my right shoulder to stay on track and hiked for hours. The land was dry and steep in places, but there were thick sections of trees with enough shade to cool off in. I drank often, stopped a few times to rest, and by evening I found a spot near a dry creek bed with enough flat ground to set up camp. I pitched the tent under a cluster of pine trees, gathered some dry wood, and lit a small fire. The air was cool, pine-scented, and clean. It felt good to be that far from anyone, just listening to the forest settle. I ate jerky, sipped water, and lay down in the tent as it got dark. I remember hearing a few coyotes in the distance. That was normal. The first night was peaceful, nothing out of place. I woke up early, packed up, and kept heading deeper into the woods. I didn't have a specific destination in mind. I just wanted to move further from roads, from people, from anything artificial. The higher I climbed, the quieter it got. By midday, I hadn't seen a single soul.
No footprints, no trash.
Nothing, but something small changed that second afternoon. I found a tin can. It was half buried in dirt about a foot off the trail, rusted, the label long gone. It looked old, maybe 10, 20 years, maybe more. I thought nothing of it at first, but 30 minutes later, I spotted a strip of blue tarp snagged in a bush, then a piece of rope nailed into a tree. These weren't ancient, maybe a few years old at most. I started thinking someone else might be living out here. Some off-grid hermit or survivalist. Maybe just another camper who forgot his gear. Still, it didn't sit right. I wasn't near any known campsite. This place was way too remote for casual hikers. That night, I camped near a ridge that overlooked a long, empty stretch of forest. No towns, no cabins, just endless trees. I set up near a rock outcropping, made a small fire again, and tried to enjoy the evening. But I kept looking out into the woods, like I expected to see someone standing out there. I didn't. I turned in early, figuring I was just letting my imagination mess with me. But I woke up just after midnight. I didn't know why at first. There wasn't a sound. No snapping branches, no animals moving. Just dead silence. And it wasn't the kind of peaceful silence you get in the mountains. It was heavy, like the woods were holding their breath. I lay still, listening. Then I heard it. A soft crunch, like someone stepping lightly on dry pine needles. It came from about 20 feet to the right of the tent. Then again, another step, then silence. I grabbed the revolver from my pack, held my breath, and waited. My heart thumped so hard I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. After maybe 5 minutes of nothing, I unzipped the tent slowly and peeked out. The moon was full and bright enough to see, but there was nothing there. No person, no animal. I stayed up until dawn, staring into the trees. By morning, I convinced myself it could have been a deer or a coyote, maybe even a bear. They move quiet sometimes. Still, I packed up fast and kept hiking, heading further east, toward a small lake marked on my printed topo map. It was supposed to be in a small basin about 8 miles away. As I walked, I noticed something else.
Footprints.
Just faint indentations, barely visible in the hard dirt. But they were there. They weren't mine, too small. I wear size 12 boots. These were maybe size 9 or 10. And they were fresh. Maybe a day old, maybe less. I followed them for half a mile before they veered off into thicker brush and vanished. By the time I reached the lake, I was exhausted. I wanted to go home. I knew I should have turned around, but I was already 3 days in and didn't want to hike 8 hours back in one push. The lake was small and surrounded by trees and rock walls. It looked untouched, but there were signs it wasn't. Near the edge of the lake, half hidden behind a log, was a small tarp shelter. Blue plastic, faded and torn at the corners. It looked old, but someone had been using it recently. I saw a fire ring, a few cans, and a plastic bottle with cloudy water inside. No one was around, but I didn't like it. I didn't want to camp that close to someone else's setup. So I moved a quarter-mile uphill and found a ledge with a view of the basin. I could see the lake, the trees, the sky, and if someone returned to the tarp, I'd see them before they saw me. That night was worse. Around 2 a.m, I woke up again. This time I knew what I heard. Footsteps, clear as day, slow, deliberate, walking up the hill toward me. No animal walks like that. Not a deer, not a bear. This was someone on 2 feet. I didn't move. I had the gun beside me, my heart pounding in my ears. The footsteps stopped maybe 30 feet away. Then nothing. I waited. No sound.
No breathing. No branches snapping.
Just stillness. After half an hour, I cracked the tent flap and looked out. Again, no one. But there was something new. On a flat rock near the edge of the ledge, just 20 feet from my tent, was a dead rabbit. Its neck was broken, clean, no blood, no signs of a predator, just placed there, like a gift or a warning. I didn't sleep after that. At dawn, I packed up and left fast. I didn't eat, didn't filter water, just walked. I wasn't following a trail anymore. I just used the sun and my compass to push west. I wanted out. I didn't care how long it took. But the woods didn't make it easy. I walked for hours and never found the old trail again. Everything started looking the same, Pine trees, dry creek beds, rocky hills. I kept a steady pace, checked the compass every 20 minutes, and still felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. Around mid-afternoon, I heard something that made my stomach turn. Chopping, the distant, rhythmic thunk of an axe hitting wood. Not close, but not far either. Maybe half a mile north. I froze and listened. It went on for about a minute, then stopped. That was enough for me. I turned sharply south and started moving faster, practically jogging down a slope, ignoring the scratches from thorns and branches. I didn't want to meet whoever was out there swinging that axe. The dead rabbit, the tarp, the footsteps. None of it felt right. I made it 5 more miles before I found a stretch of rock with a clear view of the valley below. And for the first time in 3 days, I saw something familiar, an old logging road. It was probably a mile away, but I could reach it before dark if I moved. I slid down the hill, cut across the basin, and hit the road by evening. I followed it west for hours until I found my truck just as the sun was going down. It was still there, untouched, but something was sitting on the hood. A rock, just a plain, round rock about the size of a baseball. It wasn't there when I left. I didn't hesitate. I unlocked the truck, threw my gear in, and drove. I didn't stop for food. I didn't stop for gas. I drove all the way back to Boise, only pulling over once when I felt like I might fall asleep at the wheel. When I got home, I unloaded my gear and checked the tent. There were marks on the rainfly, not scratches, not tears, marks, like someone had pressed a hand against it with dirty fingers. For long smears, like someone had been leaning on it. I never went back to Dry Creek Ridge. I told myself I'd imagined most of it, that maybe someone else had just been living rough out there, off the grid, and I'd stumbled too close. But the dead rabbit, the footsteps, the rock on my hood, I couldn't explain those. I still camp, but only in places with cell service within a mile of other people. Places with trailheads and ranger stations and signs. I learned something out there. It isn't always the wild animals you have to worry about. It's the people who choose to live where no one can find them and don't want to be found. It was mid-September 2019. I was 34 then, single, no kids, and had taken a week off work to get away from the noise and stress of the city. I lived in Bend, Oregon, and had been doing remote IT work for the past 3 years. The pressure from deadlines and clients had started to pile up, and I felt myself slipping into that sort of mental exhaustion you can't fix with a few nights of sleep. I needed quiet. I needed space. So I packed up my older Toyota Tacoma, loaded my dog in the passenger seat, and drove east into the desert. My dog's name is Cody, a 6-year-old yellow lab. Strong, smart, always full of energy. I trusted him more than I trusted most people. I'd taken him hiking, fishing, camping. He was my closest companion. Never had a problem with him. If anything, I felt safer with him than being alone. I planned to spend 4 nights camping in the high desert about 2 hours east of Burns, Oregon. Not a lot of people go that far out. The area isn't managed like a national park. It's just empty scrubland and jagged basalt cliffs, scattered trees and rough dirt trails used mostly by ranchers or hunters. The kind of place where no one would bother you, but also the kind of place where if something went wrong, there might not be anyone around to help. I didn't mind that. I brought plenty of supplies, water, food, backup batteries, emergency gear. I had paper maps, GPS. I'd done stuff like this before, though maybe not quite this far out. The drive was quiet. Cody leaned against the window most of the way, nose twitching. We passed through burns, then smaller roads, then no roads at all, just dusty tracks etched into the pale earth. By late afternoon, I found a flat clearing surrounded by low hills and some thin trees that offered a bit of shade. There were no signs of other campers, no tire tracks. Felt untouched, wild, peaceful. I parked the truck, stretched my legs, and let Cody out to explore. He trotted off, sniffing bushes and rocks, tail wagging. I set up my tent about 20 yards from the truck and laid out a small cooking area with my portable stove and supplies. The ground was hard and dry, sand and gravel mostly. Sharp-edged rocks poked through in places. I had to clear some debris to get the tent staked in properly. That first night was uneventful. We ate some freeze-dried food, watched the sunset behind the hills. The sky turned a deep orange, then purple, then black. The stars were unbelievable out there. With no towns nearby, the sky was full of light. Cody curled up beside me near the fire pit as I drank some tea and just listened. Nothing, not even wind, just total silence. I slept well that night. The air got cold, but I had a good sleeping bag. Cody snored a bit. I felt completely alone in a good way. The second day, we hiked one of the ridgelines. I had marked a few places I wanted to check out: rock formations, dry creek beds. It was hot during the day, cold at night. Classic high desert. We walked for hours, didn't see a soul. Cody chased a rabbit for a while, but came back with his tongue hanging out and his tail high. Later that afternoon, after we returned to camp, I noticed something strange. About 50 yards from the tent, just beyond where the trees thinned out, I saw tire tracks in the dirt. Not fresh, but not completely old either. The kind of faint imprint you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. Wide treads. Looked like a pickup or a 4x4 had driven through there recently. Caught my attention because I hadn't seen any sign of other people. No litter, no noise, no movement. It was odd that someone else had been out here, and I hadn't noticed. I walked the tracks for a bit. They went down into a wash and curved behind a hill, then disappeared. Looked like whoever it was had turned around and left. I didn't think much of it at the time. Figured maybe it was a rancher checking fence lines or some hunters passing through. But that night, I started to feel different. Cody was restless after dark. Normally he sleeps right through the night, but this time he kept lifting his head, ears perked, listening to something I couldn't hear. A couple of times he growled low in his throat, barely audible. I stepped outside the tent with my flashlight, scanned the trees, saw nothing, no movement, no sound, but the feeling in my chest, tight, heavy. Cody stayed close that night, real close. He lay pressed against the flap of the tent, like he wanted to be the first thing between me and anything outside. By the third day, I felt a little unsettled, but I didn't want to cut the trip short. I pushed the thought aside and did what I came to do. Hiked some more, took photos, tried to let the quiet heal me. But then something happened that I still can't explain. That afternoon, I came back to camp and found a boot print in the dirt. One, just one, maybe 10 feet from my tent. The wind hadn't been strong that day. There was no way I missed it earlier. It wasn't mine. Wrong tread, too big. Cody started barking when we got back. Not just alert barking, angry. Hackles up, full voice. He ran toward the tree line and stayed there, ears pointed, body tense. I shouted for him and he came back, but he didn't relax for hours. Kept pacing in a wide circle around camp, sniffing the air, looking in every direction. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the fire going longer than usual, sitting with my flashlight in one hand and a heavy-duty knife in the other. Cody didn't sleep either. He stayed awake, head always turning, eyes scanning the dark. The wind picked up a bit, and every rustle made my chest jump. I thought about leaving, but I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe it was just a random hiker or camper who had passed through earlier and I hadn't noticed. Maybe the print had been there all along. But I knew that wasn't true. The fourth morning, I found something else. Near the edge of camp, there was a dead rabbit, gutted, slit clean down the middle, not chewed up like an animal would do it. No blood trail, just lying there, belly open like it had been placed there. Cody didn't go near it. I packed everything. Fast. No breakfast, no fire. I crammed the tent into the truck bed. Didn't even roll it up properly. Just stuffed it. My hands were shaking. Cody jumped into the cab without me saying anything. We drove out fast, bouncing along the dirt path until we hit a wider gravel road. I didn't stop. My heart was pounding like a drum. I didn't feel safe until we reached the paved highway back near Burns, and even then, it didn't fully stop. When I got home, I kept replaying everything. The boot print, the gutted rabbit, Cody's behavior, the truck tracks. None of it added up to something specific. It wasn't like I saw someone. It wasn't like I heard threats, but it felt targeted. Weeks passed, and I still couldn't sleep well. I looked at satellite maps, trying to see if there were ranches or anything nearby. I couldn't find any structures in that area. I told a friend who used to work in search and rescue about it. He just nodded and said people sometimes live off-grid out there. Squatters, loners, guys who don't want to be found. He said some of them don't like company. He told me a story about a man who went missing near Steens Mountain in the 90s. They found his car but never found him. That didn't help. I haven't been back to that area since. I still camp, still hike, but not that deep into the desert. Not alone, and not without service. Sometimes I still think about the way that Rabbit was laid out. Too clean, like a message. Cody's older now. He doesn't move as fast, but he still perks up when he hears something outside. I trust him more than ever. I never saw who was out there with us, but someone was, and I don't think they wanted us to leave. I think they wanted us to stay, and that's why I left. It was the summer of 2018 when I decided to take a solo camping trip across France. I had just turned 26, and I was working a job in Paris that left me burnt out and tired of city life. I needed a break, somewhere quiet, away from people, phones, traffic, emails, and everything else that had been eating away at my mind for the past year. My name's Matthew, and back then I thought I could handle anything. I really did, but this one trip changed the way I see the world. I chose a small forested area near a village called Mouth in eastern France, close to the Swiss border. It wasn't a famous tourist destination, which is what I wanted. I looked it up online, and there were a few old posts on hiking forums about it. Nothing creepy or mysterious, just people saying the trails were decent and it stayed quiet even in the summer. Perfect. I rented a small car and drove out on a Tuesday morning with a rucksack, a tent, some food, a little gas stove, water, a few changes of clothes, a first aid kit, and my sleeping bag. I brought a knife too, nothing fancy, just a basic camping knife I'd had for years. Took about 6 hours to get there. The last stretch of the road narrowed into a gravel track, and when I reached the end, I parked in a dirt clearing where a wooden sign pointed to a hiking trail. No one else was around. There were tire marks in the dirt, but they looked old and faded. The air was cool and fresh, and I could hear birds echoing through the trees. Felt right. I hiked about 40 minutes into the woods before I found a small flat area near a dry stream bed. I set up my tent there, rolled out my mat, and made a small fire pit with some stones. It was mid-afternoon by the time I finished. I boiled some water, made instant noodles, and sat there in silence, watching the trees sway above me. The forest was thick, mostly pine, but the underbrush wasn't too dense, so I could see a good distance in most directions. I didn't feel nervous. Not yet. That first night was quiet. I read a book on my Kindle for a while and went to sleep early. I didn't even need earplugs. The only sounds were owls and the wind moving through the branches. I felt completely alone, and for the first time in a while, I liked it. No stress, no noise, just me and the woods. The second day, I woke up around 7 a.m. and made coffee with my gas burner. It was chilly, probably around 10 degrees Celsius. I wandered a bit with my map, followed a trail deeper into the woods, and came across a tiny abandoned stone building that looked like it had once been a shepherd's hut. I took a few pictures, sat on a rock, and ate some trail mix. That afternoon, something strange happened. I was walking back toward my campsite from the stream when I saw movement between the trees ahead. At first, I thought it was a deer, but it wasn't. It was a man, tall, thin, and wearing a dark coat even though it was warm. He wasn't carrying a bag or hiking gear. He was just standing there, half turned away, maybe 50 meters from me. His posture was stiff and he didn't seem to notice me. I stopped walking and watched him for a moment. Then, without turning his head, he stepped behind a tree and disappeared from view. I waited. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement. I called out a loud bonjour, even though I had told myself I wouldn't talk to anyone. Still nothing. I waited another minute, then moved forward cautiously. But when I got to where he had been, there was no one. No tracks, no footprints in the soft dirt. I walked in circles, trying to see if he had gone in another direction, but it was like he had just vanished. I chalked it up to maybe seeing someone from the village hunting or mushroom picking. Still, it didn't sit right with me. His stillness, his clothes, the way he didn't react to me. I didn't mention it in my travel journal that night because I didn't want to admit it bothered me. But it did. That night, I had a hard time sleeping. I kept waking up, convinced I'd heard twigs snapping outside. At one point around 2 a.m., I thought I saw a light flash briefly through the trees. I lay in my sleeping bag, my hand gripping the knife beside me, waiting. I told myself it was nothing, probably just my imagination messing with me. By the third day, I felt off. I was still alone, hadn't seen or heard anyone else since I arrived, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I didn't explore much that day. I stayed close to my camp, read, and cooked a little more food. Every now and then, I'd glance up because I thought I heard movement, but there was never anything there. That evening, while I was boiling water, I found something odd. A small twig figure, maybe 10 centimeters tall, leaning against a rock near the edge of my camp. It looked like someone had tied it together with bits of dried grass and string. I hadn't seen it before. It hadn't been there the night before, I was sure of that. I stared at it for a long time. My first thought was that maybe someone else was camping nearby and decided to mess with me. But I hadn't seen a single soul since I parked my car. Not one person. No voices. No fires in the distance. Nothing. I tossed the figure into the fire. That night, the forest felt different. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was tight, like something was holding its breath. Every little sound made me flinch. I stayed awake most of the night. Around 4 a.m., just before dawn, I finally drifted off. I woke up to the sound of something brushing against the side of my tent. It was light. Not claws, not a paw, more like fingers. I stayed frozen. I couldn't hear breathing or footsteps, but something was moving very slowly along the outer fabric of the tent. I reached for my knife again and just waited. After about 20 seconds, the sound stopped. I waited another 10 minutes before I worked up the nerve to unzip the tent and look outside. There was nothing. No prints. No broken twigs. Just morning light and cold air. But then I saw something further back, near the trees. A small pile of stones that hadn't been there before. 6 smooth rocks stacked in a tower, about knee height, like a marker. I walked up to it slowly. One of the stones had a smear of something dark on it. I thought maybe mud, but it looked like blood. That was the moment I decided I was leaving. I packed my stuff in a rush. Took less than 30 minutes. I didn't even make coffee. I just shoved everything into my bag, kicked out the fire pit, and started walking fast toward where I had parked. I checked over my shoulder constantly. The woods were still silent, but it didn't feel like I was alone. The hike back felt longer than it should have. I was sweating and stumbling over roots, and every few minutes I thought I heard someone behind me, just a step or two. But when I turned, there was no one. When I finally reached the clearing where I had left my car, I froze. The back hatch was open. I hadn't left it that way. I was 100% sure I had locked the whole car when I left it 3 days ago. Nothing was missing, but the inside had been disturbed. My spare clothes had been pulled out, and there were muddy smears on the floor. I closed it fast, jumped in, and started the engine. The drive out of the forest was nerve-wracking. Every turn, I expected someone to step out of the trees or block the road, but no one came. When I finally hit paved road again and passed the first farmhouse, I breathed like I hadn't in days. I didn't go back to Paris right away. I stopped at a small hotel in Pontarlier and spent the night there. I didn't sleep well. I kept checking the door and window. I was still trying to process everything. Was it just some local screwing with me? Or was it worse than that? The next day, I called the local gendarmerie, the rural police, and told them someone had messed with my car while it was parked near mouth. I didn't tell them everything, just that someone had opened the trunk and that maybe they should check the area. The officer on the phone sounded bored, said maybe it was kids or a poacher. I didn't push it. I flew back to the UK a week later. I didn't tell anyone what really happened, not even my parents. I still have the photos I took on that trip, including one of the abandoned shepherd's hut. But I don't look at them much anymore. Something was wrong in those woods. I don't know if it was one man or more. I don't know why he watched me or touched my tent or left those markers. But I do know this. If I hadn't packed up when I did, if I had stayed one more night, I might not have made it out. There was no ghost, no monster, just someone real, quiet, and careful who was watching. I haven't been camping alone since, and I never will again. I wasn't supposed to be there that weekend. Rain Creek Campground was one of those half-forgotten places deep in the Ozark National Forest. Not many people bothered with it anymore since the access road got damaged a few years back. The park rangers had stopped maintaining it regularly, and there were no marked trails left. Most of the campsites were rough patches of grass with faded metal fire rings, the kind that looked like they hadn't held a proper fire in years. That was exactly why I chose it. Life had gotten heavy. I worked a lot, never really saw anyone anymore, and my apartment in Little Rock felt like a trap. The kind you set for yourself without realizing it. For walls, the same blinking router light, the microwave spinning leftovers in the dark. I needed to get out. I needed silence and trees, maybe some cold air and mud on my boots to shake something loose. So I packed my gear late on a Friday night: tent, stove, knife, first aid kit, dry food, tarp, extra socks, and drove up the winding roads early Saturday morning. By 11 a.m., I was bouncing down the rocky path leading to Rain Creek. My old truck groaned, tires slipping a little in the loose gravel, but it made it. I parked just beyond a small wooden sign that said, Site 3 to 0.4 miles. There were no other cars. I loaded up my pack and started walking. The leaves were mostly down, wet from a drizzle the night before. The path was narrow and uneven, scattered with old branches. The air smelled like damp bark and soil. No phone service. No noises except for wind through the trees and the squish of my boots. By the time I got to Site 3, the clouds had thickened. It was a decent clearing, maybe 20 feet across, surrounded by a semicircle of tall pines. You could see a narrow stretch of the creek if you walked to the edge of the slope. I set my tent near the tree lean, strung a tarp overhead, and set up a dry zone for cooking. I used a few downed limbs to build a seat and gathered some firewood, though everything was damp. The first few hours were peaceful. I ate a protein bar, read half a chapter of an old paperback, and sat quietly, watching the trees sway. That kind of silence feels heavy at first, but then it settles into you. I was starting to feel something like relief. Then the rain started. First it was soft, just a whisper on the tarp. But within an hour, it turned heavy. Thick drops pounding on the nylon, streaming down the sides of my tent, soaking the forest. The light faded quickly, earlier than usual. It was only 4:30, but it felt like dusk. I pulled on my rain jacket, zipped the tent closed behind me, and boiled water under the tarp for a freeze-dried meal. I ate standing up, watching the tree line. My firewood was useless now, soaked to the core. The cold crept in fast. By 6, it was pitch black. I crawled into the tent, peeled off the wet layers, and climbed into my sleeping bag. I checked my phone, still no service. I stared at the ceiling of the tent for a while, listening to the rain drum harder and harder. That's when I heard it. A single hard crack, like a branch breaking, not a small one. I sat up. It had come from uphill beyond the campsite, maybe 30 or 40 feet away. I waited, heart beating a little faster. Rain can play tricks, I told myself. Wind knocks things loose. Trees shed limbs. But then I heard footsteps. Heavy, slow ones. Wet leaves underfoot. Not an animal. Not a deer. Not in that pattern. 3 steps. Then nothing. Then 2 more. I turned off my headlamp and sat perfectly still. For 5 minutes, there was only rain. I leaned slightly to the side and pulled my knife from my boot. My breathing had slowed. I waited. Nothing. Then a sharper noise, a sloshing scrape, like something sliding across wet ground. Sounded close, just beyond the tarp. Maybe 10 feet. I didn't move. My hand gripped the knife tighter. My mind flipped through possibilities. A bear? A lost hiker? A hunter? But no one camped here. No one came here. 10 minutes passed. The rain got worse. Winds picked up. The trees groaned and hissed. I didn't hear anything else. By 8 p.m., I figured maybe it was nothing. Maybe just wind and my mind filling in gaps. I lay back down, tried to sleep. I must have drifted in and out for about an hour before I felt it. The tent wall flexed, like something pressed into it from the outside. Not a full push, just enough to cave the fabric inward for a second. I froze, eyes wide open, the knife still in my hand. It happened again just to the left of my feet, then again closer to my chest. Something was testing the tension of the tent. My heart thudded loud in my ears. My mouth was dry. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Then silence. For 15 minutes, nothing happened. Then all at once, a hard slap hit the tent near my head. Not a branch, not rain. It was a palm. I knew it. Someone was outside, right there, standing in the storm, touching my tent. I didn't breathe. Another press, this time directly behind me, pushed the nylon inward hard enough to brush my sleeping bag. I snapped. I unzipped the tent in one violent motion, burst out barefoot with the knife in hand, and spun in the dark. Nothing. My headlamp clicked on. Light cut through rain and fog. Nothing but trees. No tracks. No person. But then I saw it. A boot print, half sunken in the mud just outside my tarp line. Deep tread. Not mine. I scanned everything behind trees, down the trail, up the slope. Nothing. I stood there for a long time, rain soaking my shirt, my hair plastered to my face, knife clenched tight. I didn't call out, didn't shout, just listened. After a while, I backed into the tent and zipped it shut. I pulled my boots inside. I didn't sleep at all. The rain didn't stop. By morning, the forest was fogged over, and everything was slick with mud. I packed quickly. The air felt wrong, like something watched from a distance. I didn't even eat, Just broke camp and hiked back with one hand on my knife the whole time. The trail was quiet, but I kept seeing boot prints. Always one, like someone had walked up to my camp, then left after I saw the one near the tarp. But the spacing was odd, too wide, too erratic. One here, then nothing for 10 feet. Then another. They weren't fresh either, which made no sense with the rain. By the time I reached my truck, I was soaked and shaking. I threw everything in the bed, jumped in the cab, and turned the key. It wouldn't start. I tried again. Nothing. Panic. The third time, the engine turned over barely, and I gunned it down the gravel, mud spraying the sides. I didn't stop until I hit the main road. I never went back to Rain Creek. I looked it up a week later. Found a forum post from 2 years ago. A guy saying he'd camped there, heard things at night. Then someone else replied with a vague warning about old hunting shacks in that part of the woods and people who don't want to be found. No one ever mentioned it again. I still don't know who was out there that night. Maybe it was just someone passing through, but I can't shake that feeling. Whoever it was, they were watching, waiting, testing my tent like they'd done it before, like they were used to people breaking when they were scared enough. I never told anyone, not my brother, not my friends. Felt too strange, too unreal, but I still camp, just not alone, and not anywhere near Arkansas. I was 28 years old when I did something I now realize was one of the dumbest ideas I've ever followed through on. I had just left a logistics job in Chicago and was in that restless space where you feel like doing something spontaneous to shake the dust off your life. I had a couple of weeks before I started a new role down in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I decided to take a solo road trip. I packed up my used 2012 Subaru Forester, tossed in a cheap tent, a camping stove, a sleeping bag, and the rest of the gear I'd used in the past for weekend hikes. I figured I'd hit a few state parks, maybe stop by some small towns I'd never heard of. No real plan, just go where the road led me. A few days into the drive, I ended up in rural Missouri. I'd pulled off Interstate 44 and followed some winding county roads into a tiny place called Hartlow. Barely a blip on the map. The town looked like it had seen better days. Most of the storefronts on Main Street were shuttered, and even the gas station looked like it was on its last leg. I stopped there to fill up and grab some snacks. The older woman at the register glanced at my backpack and asked if I was headed out to the lake. I said I was just passing through, maybe camping for a night. She didn't say anything after that, just rang me up with this kind of flat expression. While munching on trail mix in the car, I pulled out my phone and started looking at satellite maps. The official campgrounds in the area didn't appeal to me. Too close to roads, too groomed. I liked seclusion, something quiet where I could fall asleep to the sounds of nature and wake up with morning fog rolling across the ground. I zoomed out and noticed a large patch of green to the northeast of town. There were no markers for hiking trails or park signs, just raw woods and open fields. It was bordered on the south side by a long, narrow graveyard called Ashford Cemetery. I'd never camped near a graveyard before, but the thought didn't bother me. In fact, I figured it was the kind of place no one else would bother going to, especially at night. That's what I was after, complete solitude. I drove about 25 minutes along cracked, narrowing country roads. The GPS lost signal eventually, but I followed an old gravel path leading toward the cemetery. It wasn't maintained. Grass and weeds pushed up through the center of the road, and branches hung low enough to scrape across my windshield. After another half-mile, the trees opened up to a clearing with a rusted iron gate. Beyond it, I could see rows of headstones spread across a gentle hill. There wasn't a soul around. I parked the car just off the gravel, close enough to back out easily, but out of view from the road. Not that I'd seen another car in nearly an hour. I grabbed my pack, slung it over one shoulder, and stepped over the gate, which had no lock, just a chain looped through. The hinges had rusted solid. Ashford Cemetery was old, really old. Many of the stones had cracked or fallen, with names worn nearly flat by time and weather. The air was still, no wind, just the occasional chirp of a bird far off or the ticking noise of insects in the grass. I walked around the perimeter until I found a small wooded stretch behind the far corner of the cemetery. The trees there were thick enough to offer cover but spaced out enough that I could pitch my tent without a problem. I set up camp about 40 feet into the trees. From there, I could still see the cemetery's edge, but it felt distant. The ground was soft with dead leaves, and the canopy above filtered out most of the sunlight. I unrolled my sleeping bag inside the tent, got my mini propane stove going, and made a cup of coffee while heating up some canned stew. I sat there on a fold-out stool, sipping the coffee, listening to the dull quiet of the forest. I remember thinking it was exactly what I needed. No emails, no traffic, no office lights, just trees, earth, and sky. The sun dropped quicker than I expected. It was only about 6:30 p.m., but the woods went dark fast. I turned on my headlamp and walked back to the edge of the cemetery. There was a kind of strange peace to it. Just me, the wind brushing faintly through the grass, and rows of weather-beaten stones. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, just observing, not really thinking much. Then I heard something. It was faint, like a rustling. I spun around, half expecting to see a deer or raccoon, but the woods behind me were still. The noise had been light, too light to be a person walking, but too distinct to be the wind. I stepped back toward the tent and stood still for a long minute, listening. Nothing. My mind started playing the usual tricks. Maybe a squirrel on a branch, maybe my own boot catching something I didn't notice. I went back to my tent and zipped it closed, ate the rest of my stew cold, and read a book by flashlight. Eventually, I drifted off around 9:30 p.m. I woke up to the sound of something hitting metal. It was subtle, like a dull clang or a rattle. I stayed completely still, every muscle tensed. I turned off my flashlight and listened in the dark. My heart thudded harder with each second. The noise came again. A quick tap, like something brushing or striking the iron gate I had stepped over earlier. I slid silently out of my sleeping bag and pulled the zipper just enough to peek outside. My eyes were adjusting to the dark. I didn't use the flashlight. If there was someone out there, I didn't want them to know I was awake. Then I saw it. About 30 yards away, near the gate, a small pinprick of light moved slowly, side to side, like someone holding a flashlight and scanning the area. But the light wasn't strong. It flickered, dim and low. It wasn't from a modern flashlight. It looked like it could have been a phone screen or even a small candle. It moved closer to the gate, then disappeared for a few seconds. I barely breathed. Then I heard footsteps, one, maybe two sets, soft but distinct, grass flattening under deliberate weight. They weren't rushing or staggering like someone drunk or lost. These were calm, patient steps. I was frozen. I didn't know if I should grab my knife, my car keys, or just stay still. I knew I couldn't risk unzipping the tent any further without making noise. I sat there, barely breathing, and waited. The footsteps circled. I could hear them moving from the gate toward the tree line. Not directly toward me, but wide, like they were sweeping around the edge. Every few minutes, they'd stop, then pick up again, crunching dry leaves or breaking a twig. They weren't trying to be quiet. They wanted to be heard. It went on for almost an hour. Then, nothing. Silence returned. I stayed awake until morning. When light finally pushed through the trees, I packed up fast. I didn't eat, didn't even brush my teeth. I just shoved everything into the pack and hiked back to the car. But something stopped me. Near the gate, where I had crossed the day before, I saw a fresh footprint in the dirt. Not a boot tread, just a single barefoot print. Deep, clean. like someone had stood there a long while. And next to it, there was something else, half buried in the grass. A rusty tin can, the kind you'd see used to hold old nails or screws. Inside it were cigarette butts. Some of them looked fresh. I got in the car, locked the doors, and drove out without stopping until I hit the interstate. I didn't file a report. What would I even say? Someone walked near my tent? It wasn't illegal to be in the cemetery. But the way they moved, the way they circled silent and patient, it wasn't normal. It wasn't right. A few weeks later, I looked up Hartlow and Ashford Cemetery online. There wasn't much about either. But I did find a few forum threads from nearly a decade ago, hikers and explorers posting about abandoned sites. One thread mentioned Ashford. A user named TR77 wrote that he'd seen signs of squatting there, and that locals warned him about people who camp there that never leave. I don't know who was out there that night. Maybe a drifter. Maybe someone using the woods to hide from something. But I do know this, when I left, I didn't feel like I was just walking away from a creepy night. I felt like I had barely escaped something worse, and I haven't camped alone since. I was 31 when I decided to take a break from the city for a few days. It was 2019, and I had been working 12-hour shifts at a warehouse in Jacksonville, Florida. I'd saved up enough to take a week off and figured I'd drive north to get some real solitude. Maybe do some hiking and camping in Georgia. I'd always been drawn to the woods. I liked the quiet, the smell of pine and earth, the way time slows down when you're away from cars and phones and crowds. I picked a place I found online, Black Oak Forest. It was one of those spots you don't hear much about, kind of wedged between two state parks, but not exactly a park itself. Just old timberland and forgotten trails, with a handful of campsites that hadn't been used in a while. The spot was about a 5-hour drive from home. I packed up my old Toyota Tacoma with a tent, sleeping bag, a cooler of food, and basic supplies: matches, flashlight, pocket knife, some rope, a water purifier, and a basic med kit. I got to the area late in the afternoon and drove about 6 miles down a gravel road past the last sign of civilization. A rusty little gas station with no one inside and a back in 10 minutes sign that looked like it had been there for days. Once the road ended, I parked and hiked another mile in with my gear to the campsite I picked. It was a flat clearing surrounded by trees that looked like they'd been standing 100 years. The only sign of recent human activity was a rusted fire ring and a broken folding chair slumped against a log. I liked that. It felt untouched. I set up camp, took my time getting things in order, staked down the tent, unpacked my cooler, and gathered some dead branches for a fire. I didn't plan to do anything fancy, just sit, eat, relax, and maybe hike deeper in the next morning. It was late September, and the air had that perfect early autumn coolness. I roasted a few hot dogs over the fire and drank a beer from the cooler. No phone signal, no noise except crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. Just me and the woods. I felt calm. I turned in around 10, climbed into my sleeping bag, and laid there listening to the wind outside. The tent walls flapped softly, and a few times I thought I heard footsteps, just faint crunches of twigs and leaves. But that's normal. Animals move at night. Deer, raccoons, squirrels, all that. I told myself it was nothing and eventually drifted off. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to a sound that snapped me fully awake. It wasn't a normal forest sound. It was a sharp metallic clinking. Not loud, but close, like someone tapping a small piece of metal against another, slowly and deliberately. Then it stopped. I waited, holding my breath, every nerve awake. For about a minute, there was nothing. Then I heard a quiet grunt, like someone clearing their throat. Human. I stayed completely still. My heart was pounding, and I could feel sweat on my back even though the air was cool. I slowly reached to my side and grabbed my flashlight, careful not to make a sound. I unzipped the tent flap just enough to peek out. My fire had burned down to a faint glow, and beyond that was nothing but dark shapes of trees. But then, just barely visible, maybe 15 feet away, someone was crouched behind a tree. I could just make out a shoulder, the curve of a head. They weren't moving, just watching. I don't know how long they'd been there. Maybe hours. Maybe since I first started setting up. I didn't shine the light. I didn't move. I eased the zipper back down and stayed still for what felt like an hour. Eventually, the crunch of leaves started again, moving away this time and fading into the forest. I waited until the sun rose before I unzipped the tent again. When I stepped out, everything looked normal. The woods were quiet, peaceful, but something was off. A small detail that made the hairs on my arms stand up. One of my hiking boots was moved. Not far, just turned slightly and shifted a few feet to the left. I never leave my stuff like that. Someone had been right there, right outside the tent while I slept. I packed up right then, threw everything into my backpack and collapsed the tent in minutes. I didn't even bother to eat. I wanted to be gone. I started back on the trail fast, trying not to break into a full sprint. It was just past 7 a.m. The trees were letting in light, and I kept checking over my shoulder every couple of steps. Then, about halfway back to my truck, I noticed something else that didn't sit right. A small pile of pebbles on the side of the trail, neatly stacked, for stones high. Nothing dramatic, but definitely placed by hand. A little farther up, another stack. Then another, every 30 yards or so. I hadn't seen them on the way in. Someone had made them overnight. Maybe to mark something. Maybe just to mess with me. I didn't stop to study them. I just kept moving. My truck came into view and I damn near jogged the last stretch. When I got in and locked the doors, I sat for a minute just breathing. My mouth was dry and my hands were shaking. The gas gauge was half full and I didn't care about the rest of the food or gear. I just wanted out. The drive back felt longer. Every car I passed, every person I saw on the side of the road, I wondered if they had followed me. I didn't stop until I hit a busy gas station an hour outside the forest. I filled up, bought a coffee, and sat in the lot with the engine running. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Someone stood near my tent and didn't do anything? There was no crime, no evidence, just weirdness. I never went back to Black Oak Forest. I looked it up again later that week, and it barely existed on any official maps. No rangers,
No oversight.
just public land and long-forgotten paths. I don't think I'll ever know who that was or what they wanted. Maybe they were just a drifter. Maybe they were planning to do something worse and changed their mind. Or maybe they were just watching, for hours, silently. That experience changed the way I think about being alone in the woods. Before, it felt like freedom. Now it feels like vulnerability. I still go camping, but never solo anymore. I always tell someone where I'm going. I keep a satellite tracker, and I carry more than just a pocket knife. Because sometimes it's not the animals you should worry about. It's the people who don't want to be seen. The ones who wait, silent and still, just beyond the firelight. I was 36 the summer I went camping alone in northern Arkansas. It was late July 2017, and I'd just gotten out of a messy breakup. I needed space, and I didn't want to talk to anyone. I'd been staying with a buddy for a few weeks, sleeping on a lumpy couch that made my back hurt every morning. I didn't have a job lined up, and honestly, I wasn't trying that hard to find one. I just wanted to disappear for a while. I found a spot online, Ozark National Forest. The pictures looked nice. Woods that stretched on forever, steep hills, clear streams. A few campgrounds, but also large areas of backcountry where I could set up my tent far away from anyone else. That's exactly what I wanted. No noise, no people, no questions. Just trees and quiet. I packed light. One of those big internal frame backpacks, a tent, sleeping bag, food for a week, water filter, a small gas stove, basic gear. I brought a small pistol too, a Glock 19. I wasn't planning on using it, but I didn't feel comfortable going that deep into the woods alone without some kind of protection. I also had a folding knife and a headlamp with spare batteries. I'd done enough camping over the years to know how to prepare. The drive took almost 5 hours from Little Rock. Once I got off the highway, the road twisted through dense green hills. The last bit was a gravel forest road that climbed slowly into the mountains. I stopped at a ranger station, filled out a backcountry permit, told them roughly where I was heading, and signed my name. The ranger at the desk barely looked up. I left my truck at a pull-off near a marked trailhead, grabbed my pack, and started walking. I followed a trail for maybe 4 miles, then veered off into the woods. I wasn't using GPS, just a topographic map and compass. I found a small ridge with a flat area on top and set up camp. The trees were thick, mostly oak and hickory, and there was a little spring-fed stream about 200 yards downhill. I spent the first day setting up, gathering firewood, filtering water, and just listening to the silence. Birds, wind in the leaves, occasional squirrel rustling around. Felt good to be away from everything. The second day, I hiked further in and tried to mark trees with small strips of orange tape so I wouldn't get lost. The forest looked the same in every direction, and without a trail it was easy to get turned around. I climbed a small bluff and sat up there for a while, looking out across the trees. Miles and miles of untouched woods. I didn't see a single person. That's what I wanted. But that night, something felt off. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a faint snapping sound outside the tent. Not an animal rustling. This was more deliberate. Slow, spaced out, like someone stepping on dry twigs, pausing, then stepping again. I froze. My heart started thumping. I listened hard. After a few seconds, I heard it again. Crack, crack, then silence. I slowly reached for the pistol in my bag and sat there, not moving, barely breathing. I didn't open the tent. I didn't shine my light. I just waited. Eventually the sound faded, but I couldn't sleep after that. I kept replaying it in my head. I tried to convince myself it was a deer, maybe a raccoon, but it didn't sound like that. The next morning, I looked around the campsite. I didn't see any tracks, just my own boot prints and flattened grass where I'd walked. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been nearby. I decided to move camp deeper into the forest just in case. I packed up and hiked for most of the day, going uphill and then dropping down into a small hollow. I didn't use my orange markers this time. I didn't want anyone following them. I set up in a new spot, this time beside a small creek under a stand of pine. I made sure my camp was well hidden. No tarp, no bright colors, and I kept the fire small that night. I didn't cook anything, just ate jerky and trail mix. As it got dark, I loaded the pistol and kept it next to my sleeping bag. That night, nothing happened. I fell asleep and stayed asleep. When I woke up, it was mid-morning and the sun was coming through the trees. I felt better. Maybe I'd imagined the sounds. Maybe it was just the stress messing with me. I spent the day fishing at the creek, even though I hadn't brought much fishing gear. I tied some line to a stick and used a safety pin for a hook. Caught a few little fish and let them go. I saw deer tracks near the bank and a couple of frogs sunning themselves on a rock. It was peaceful. I didn't hear any voices, no engines, no music, just nature. But later that afternoon, while I was gathering firewood, I found something that made my stomach sink. About 50 yards from my tent, I saw a tree that had been recently marked. A deep slash, chest high, fresh bark peeled away. I didn't do that. It wasn't from an animal. It looked like someone had dragged a knife or hatchet across the trunk. I looked around. Another tree about 20 feet away had the same kind of cut. and another after that. They were in a line, not random. Someone had made a trail marker. I followed the slashes for a few minutes. They led up the ridge behind my camp. About a quarter mile up, I found an old tarp tied between two trees. Under it were empty cans, torn food wrappers, and a pile of ashes from a fire that had burned not long ago. There were boot prints in the dirt, bigger than mine. This wasn't some old hunter's site. It looked recent. Someone had been living there. I backed out slowly and didn't touch anything. When I got back to camp, I packed up again. My arms were shaking and my shirt was soaked with sweat even though it wasn't that hot. I didn't know what I was dealing with, maybe just a drifter, maybe something worse. I didn't want to wait around to find out. I hiked for hours. I didn't follow any trail. I just moved as fast as I could through the underbrush. Heading northeast toward a Forest Service road I remembered seeing on the map. My legs burned and my shoulders ached. I stopped only to drink water. Around dusk, I found a flat area near a boulder and set up a cold camp. No fire, no light, just rolled out the bag and lay down. Couldn't sleep. Every sound made me flinch. I kept imagining someone watching me from the trees. I held the pistol in my hand and stared up at the black sky through the branches. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke to a sound like something being dropped onto the forest floor. Not close, just enough to snap me out of sleep. I stayed still and listened. Then I heard a twig snap. Then another. Closer. I sat up, heart pounding, and aimed the gun toward the sound. I didn't yell. I didn't move. The sound stopped. I sat like that for maybe half an hour, hand cramping around the grip of the pistol. Eventually, the forest was silent again. When the sky turned gray with morning, I got up and started walking. I didn't eat. I didn't even roll up the sleeping bag, just shoved it into my pack and left. I kept moving all day, checking my compass every few minutes. Around noon, I finally saw tire tracks, deep ruts in the mud heading down a slope. I followed them, hoping they'd lead to a service road. They did. 2 miles later, I came out onto a gravel road. No traffic, but at least it was something. I sat on the edge, completely drained. My clothes were soaked with sweat, my boots were cutting into my ankles, and my head was pounding. I walked that road for nearly 3 more hours before I heard an engine. A dusty pickup rounded the bend, and I stepped out, waving both arms. The driver, a guy in his 60s with a flannel shirt and a long white beard, slowed down, rolled down the window, and looked at me like I just crawled out of a hole. I asked if he could take me to the nearest ranger station. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and opened the door. At the station, I told them what happened. I left out the part about the gun. I just said I thought someone had been stalking me in the woods, and that I'd found a camp that looked abandoned but not very old. The ranger asked me to point it out on the map, which I did. He said he'd send someone to check it out. I didn't stick around. I thanked the driver again, bought a soda from a vending machine, and waited until the ranger called a tow company to help me get back to my truck. When I got back to the truck, it was untouched. No one had slashed the tires or broken the windows. Nothing was missing. I drove straight home. I didn't go back into the woods for a long time after that, not even to camp at a state park. I started locking my doors at night again, even when it was 90 degrees out. For weeks, I kept checking the backyard before going to bed. I never found out who that person was or what they were doing out there. Maybe just someone who wanted to be left alone. Maybe someone worse. But what scared me most wasn't what I saw. It was what I didn't see. The silence, the waiting, the not knowing. There was no big confrontation, no fight,
No screaming.
just slow footsteps in the dark and the feeling of being watched. And in the end, that was enough. It made me realize how small I was out there, how easy it would have been for someone to just wait for the right moment, how long they might have been watching without me knowing. I still think about it sometimes. especially when I hear a noise in the woods or see tree markings on a hike. I wonder how close I came to disappearing without a trace. But I didn't. I made it out. I went in looking for quiet. I found something else entirely. I took a solo camping trip in the fall of 2016. It was late October, just cold enough that most people were staying home, which was part of the reason I picked that time. I was 31 years old then. I'd just gone through a bad breakup, and I needed to get away from everything. My apartment in Kansas City, my office job, my phone. I wanted to be off the grid for a few days. I didn't even tell many people where I was going, just that I'd be out of town and wouldn't have service. I packed light, just my tent, some food, water jugs, a hand crank radio, a hunting knife, my sleeping bag, and a solar charger for emergencies. I decided on a spot I'd found a few years before while hiking through the Mark Twain National Forest in southern Missouri. It was deep in the woods, past the more popular trails. I remembered finding a small clearing near a stream, a perfect place to pitch a tent without being disturbed. No cars nearby, no hikers, nothing. Just trees and quiet. I parked my truck at a little gravel pull-off near an old forest access road that had long been closed to vehicles. I loaded up my gear and hiked for almost 2 hours to reach the clearing. It felt good to sweat, to feel the pack digging into my shoulders and my boots grinding into the dirt and leaves. That afternoon light slanting through the orange and yellow trees, the sound of wind nudging the canopy. It calmed me. By late afternoon, I had my tent set up near the stream. I gathered some dead wood, started a small fire, and ate some beef jerky and a couple apples. The sun dipped low fast, and the air cooled quickly. I layered up, tightened my boots, and sat close to the fire until the stars started to show. There was no sound but the wind and the water. That first night, I slept deep, the kind of sleep you can only get after a long hike and a cold evening. I didn't even stir once. When I woke the next morning, the tent was a little wet from dew, and I could see my breath in the air. I boiled some water for coffee on a small metal burner, sat by the stream with my mug, and watched a deer across the water walk quietly through the brush. Around midday, I hiked a little deeper into the woods without my pack. I took a small notebook and pen, and I wrote down anything that came to mind. I'd always wanted to try writing outdoors, and this was my chance. I found a ridge a mile or so south with a clear view through the trees and sat there for an hour. I didn't see anyone, didn't hear anything unusual, just birds and wind. But when I returned to my tent that afternoon, something was wrong. I noticed it right away. One of my water jugs had been moved. It had been resting upright near a flat rock, but now it was tipped on its side, a few feet away, like it had rolled or been kicked. I stood there for a second, unsure. I didn't remember leaving it like that, and the wind hadn't been strong enough to knock it over. I checked my bag. My food was untouched, nothing missing. The tent flap was closed, just how I left it. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a raccoon or a coyote. I even looked for tracks, but the leaves were too thick to make anything out. Still, it bothered me. That night, I built the fire bigger than before. I kept the hunting knife closer to my sleeping bag. I listened harder to the sounds of the woods. Every crack of a branch felt louder than it should have been. I didn't sleep as well. I woke up twice, heart pounding, unsure what stirred me. Once, I could have sworn I heard breathing outside the tent, just for a few seconds. But when I strained to listen, it was gone. Just the wind again. The next morning, I told myself I was being paranoid. I had come out there to clear my head, and now I was letting shadows play tricks on me. I made breakfast, instant oatmeal and coffee, and forced myself to act like everything was normal. I sat by the stream again, but I kept checking over my shoulder. Around noon, I went to gather more firewood, farther this time, into a thicker part of the forest. I carried an empty canvas bag, snapping off long dead branches and dragging them back toward camp. On my second trip out, I saw something strange wedged into the base of a tree. It was a soda can, crushed, dirty, clearly old, but it hadn't been there before. I would have noticed it. It was right on the edge of the path I'd used a dozen times already. It wasn't just the can. It was where it was placed. Not tossed or littered, wedged firmly between two roots like someone had meant for it to be seen. The way you might mark a trail. I didn't touch it. Back at the camp, I didn't feel right. The woods felt heavier somehow. The silence wasn't calming anymore. It felt like something was holding its breath. Later that afternoon, I found more. About 20 yards behind my tent, I spotted a length of thin blue twine hanging from a low tree branch. It was tied in a perfect loop, like a noose. Not big, maybe 6 inches across, but it was tied too neatly to be accidental. And again, I'd walked that area the day before. I would have seen it. That night, I barely slept. I didn't light a fire. I didn't want to draw attention. I sat in the dark inside my tent, the knife in my hand. Every few minutes I thought I heard movement. Footsteps far off, a twig snapping, the rustle of brush. But nothing ever came close. At some point after midnight, I heard something I couldn't ignore. A whistle. 2 short blasts, sharp and clear, far off to the east. Then silence. My stomach turned to ice. I stayed frozen for almost an hour. Nothing followed the whistle.
No voices. No footsteps.
Just wind again. At dawn, I packed. I didn't eat, didn't make coffee. I rolled my sleeping bag tight, broke down the tent, and stuffed everything into the pack as fast as I could. I kept scanning the trees, waiting to see movement, someone watching. But I didn't. As I started the hike out, I kept off the main path. I didn't want to walk the same way I'd come in. I veered southwest, planning to cut back to the access road from another angle. I didn't want to take the risk that someone had marked where I'd been. 2 hours in, I found another soda can. This one was new, not crushed, clean, sitting right in the middle of a small rock outcrop like a marker. I pushed harder, hiking fast, ignoring the pain in my shoulders and legs. I could feel I was being watched. Not in the imaginary way, actually watched. I kept thinking I saw someone through the trees, just behind the branches. I started talking to myself under my breath, just to hear a voice, even if it was my own. Finally, I made it to the gravel pull-off. My truck was there, thank God, but there were tire tracks in the dirt next to it. Fresh ones. Mud churned up like someone had pulled in maybe the night before. I didn't wait to figure it out. I threw my gear in the back, jumped in, and locked the doors. I peeled out of there, flying down the gravel road, fishtailing around the corners. I didn't calm down until I was 20 miles out, back on the main road, passing farms and gas stations again. Later that week, I told myself it could have been nothing, just coincidence, trash from old campers, hunters marking trails. But it didn't feel like that. It felt targeted, like someone had been following me, moving closer each day, watching how I reacted, how long I'd stay. I didn't report it. I didn't think I had enough to say. No crime, no face, just a whistle in the dark and signs someone had been close. But I haven't camped alone since. Every now and then, I'll still think about the sound of that whistle, 2 short notes. Not a bird, not wind, someone, somewhere out there, and they knew exactly where I was. My name is Ethan, and I'm 34. This happened 4 years ago, back in 2021, when I was going through a rough patch. I had just quit my job in Atlanta. Corporate stuff, soul-sucking routine, long meetings that went nowhere. I needed a break, not just from work, but from everything. People, phones, traffic, even the city's smell. So I packed up my Jeep Wrangler with a tent, sleeping bag, a cooler full of simple food, and a small stack of firewood. My plan was to disappear into the mountains of western North Carolina for a week. No cell service, no obligations. Just trees, wind, maybe some deer if I was lucky. I found a spot outside a tiny town called Robbinsville, near Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest. You drive about an hour past town on a twisting, barely paved road, then another few miles on gravel. No official campsites, just scattered clearings where hunters or wanderers like me sometimes pitch tents. The kind of place where no one's gonna check on you unless they're lost or looking for something. My spot was beside a stream that ran cold and fast over smooth rocks. Dense forest on 3 sides, an open hill behind me, and no signs of other people. No wrappers, no tire tracks, nothing. That first night, I built a small fire and sat listening to the rush of the stream. It was cool enough to wear a sweatshirt but not freezing. I brought a journal, so I wrote a few pages, trying to clear my head. I cooked a couple of hot dogs on a metal stick, then crawled into my tent around 10. The night was calm, just frogs and rustling leaves. I woke up once to pee and noticed the moon was so bright I could see my shadow. The forest around me looked silver and still. It was perfect, the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. The next day I hiked a little, maybe 3 miles upstream, nothing crazy. I didn't see anyone. I found some deer tracks, a pile of scat that was probably from a black bear, but no real danger. I came back around 4 p.m., sweaty and tired, and took a quick dip in the stream. It was freezing, but it felt good. I made a small fire again, read for a while, then turned in a little earlier. That night something woke me around 3 a.m. It wasn't loud. No growl, no branches breaking. It was the kind of noise that doesn't belong out there, soft, quick, careful. The sound of movement, but from something upright. Not a deer stepping heavily, more like a person walking without wanting to be heard. I laid there, still, my sleeping bag zipped up around me. I tried to tell myself it was just a raccoon or a fox, but it went quiet for a long time, and then I heard the sound again, closer this time, maybe 20 feet from the tent just past the fire pit. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The fire had died out hours ago, so it was pitch black. My headlamp was by my feet, and I didn't want to make noise grabbing it. I just laid there, eyes open, staring into the dark fabric of the tent ceiling. Eventually, the sound stopped. I stayed still for what felt like an hour. When I finally fell back asleep, it was already getting light. The birds were starting up, and the cold had settled in. That morning I got out and checked around the site. Nothing.
No boot prints, no cigarette boots, no trash.
The dirt around the tent was undisturbed. Maybe I'd imagined it. I was tired, after all, and my mind had been spinning for weeks before I even left home. Maybe it was just the woods messing with my head. Still, I didn't feel comfortable hiking far that day. I stuck close to camp, sat by the water, made some instant coffee, and read. But I kept looking into the trees more than I wanted to. I kept my knife on me. I even put my little camp axe in the tent that night just in case. That third night was quiet again.
No sounds.
No movement. I figured whatever I heard, it was just some animal passing through. I had food out after all. Maybe it had smelled something. Still, I didn't sleep well. By day 4, I was restless. I needed a hike to burn off the nerves. I followed a ridgeline path that climbed a few hundred feet above my camp, giving me a wide view of the surrounding valleys. From up there, the forest looked endless, and my camp was completely hidden by the tree canopy. No roads, no rooftops, no power lines. I liked that feeling, the feeling of being small. I stayed up there for a while before heading back. It was around 6 p.m. when I got back to camp, and something was wrong. I knew it before I stepped into the clearing. The air felt off, like when you walk into a room where 2 people were just arguing. My tent was there, still zipped, still upright. My cooler was closed. Nothing obvious. but the firewood I'd stacked neatly was kicked over. Not scattered like an animal knocked it, just not how I left it. Then I noticed the rope. I'd left 20 feet of nylon rope wrapped around a low branch, planning to make a bear bag later. It was gone. Not on the branch, not on the ground. Just gone. I stood there for a long minute, staring at the ropeless branch. I checked everything else, my food, my sleeping bag, my gear. Nothing stolen, nothing damaged, just that weird pile of wood and the missing rope. I should have packed up then. I know that now, but something about being that deep in the woods, that far from anything, makes you stubborn. I told myself maybe the rope slipped off in the wind. Maybe I just forgot how I left the firewood. I stayed. I made another fire, ate, and went to bed. I didn't sleep. Every creak in the trees kept me awake. I gripped the axe under my sleeping bag, waiting for something to move, but nothing came. At first light, I made coffee, packed up some food, and started hiking out. I didn't want to leave yet, but I figured I'd drive into town, top off on gas, get a warm meal, maybe find a motel for the night and return the next day. I told myself a break would help clear my head. I hiked the 2 miles to where I'd parked, on a dirt patch under some tall pines, and stopped. There were boot prints in the mud. Not mine, not even close. Bigger than mine, spaced wider apart, and more than one set. At least 2 people had walked to my Jeep and stood near the back bumper. I hadn't parked on a trail or near anything popular. Whoever came up here, they came with a reason. Then I noticed the rear hatch was open. I ran the last few steps. The glass wasn't broken, the lock wasn't forced, but someone had gone through my stuff. My spare water was gone. So was the small box of protein bars I'd kept under the back seat. My jumper cables had been tossed aside. My old raincoat was gone too. That's when the adrenaline really kicked in. This wasn't my imagination. Someone had been watching me, tracking me, and now they knew where my car was. I slammed the hatch closed and jumped in. The Jeep started up fine. I turned around on the narrow gravel path and started driving back toward town. Fast. I kept checking the mirrors. Every time the trees opened, I scanned for movement. I didn't see anyone. It took over an hour to reach Robbinsville. When I hit pavement again, I realized my hands were shaking. I didn't even know where I was going. I just needed to be around other people. I pulled into a gas station and sat there in the lot for a long time before filling up. I wanted to tell someone, but what would I say? That I heard noises and lost a rope? That some water bottles were missing? There were no laws against being in the woods.
No cameras. No proof.
I ended up getting a motel room near the edge of town, one of those cheap ones with buzzing lights and thin walls. I stayed 2 nights, then drove home. I never went back to that spot. I still camp, but only in busier parks now, places with other tents in sight and rangers who check in. A year later, I read about a missing person case in that same county. A guy named Kyle from South Carolina who disappeared while hiking alone. His truck was found near the same forest. Never found his body. Just his empty campsite and tire tracks leading away from it that didn't match his. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe I was lucky. All I know is the woods didn't scare me. The silence didn't scare me. What scared me was that someone else was out there. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who took their time watching. And if I hadn't left when I did, maybe I wouldn't be here to write this now. It was early October of 2012 when I decided to take a break from everything and head into the high desert canyons outside Farmington, New Mexico. I was 34 at the time, working as a subcontractor on a bunch of housing developments, and I had just wrapped up a 6-week job that left me drained. The kind of drained where it's not just your body, it's your head too. You walk around in a fog and forget what you opened the fridge for. I needed air, stillness, and dirt. That's how I ended up driving 2 hours out of town with the back of my pickup stuffed with gear and a cooler of food. I wasn't new to solo camping. I actually preferred it most of the time. I grew up in this part of New Mexico, and I knew how to handle myself out there. I always packed smart, plenty of water, extra food, a first aid kit, a map, and even a handheld emergency radio in case things went sideways. I had a 9mm tucked into the center console, not because I expected trouble, but because that's how I was raised. You just never know. I picked a spot I hadn't been to in years, a canyon near the Bisty Badlands, quiet and removed from the usual foot traffic. It wasn't an official campsite, no fire pits, no outhouses, just BLM land you could use if you kept things clean. There was a dry wash that cut through the middle of the area, with some scattered juniper trees and sandstone cliffs framing the whole thing. You could hike for hours and not see another soul. I parked at the base of a shallow hill and hiked my gear in about half a mile, just far enough to lose sight of the road. I set up camp near a cluster of big rocks that offered some shade and a bit of shelter from the wind. I pitched my tent facing the east, where the sun would hit it in the morning, and I dug a small fire ring using stones from around the wash. After I got the basics in place, I sat on a folding stool and just stared out into the nothing. It was beautiful, quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. That first night was uneventful, just how I like it. I grilled some hot dogs over the fire and ate them with mustard from a squeeze bottle. I had a cold beer from the cooler, watched the stars pop out one by one, then crawled into my sleeping bag and passed out. Coyotes howled in the distance around midnight, but that's normal for the area. I didn't even bother unzipping the tent to listen. I knew their song by heart. The weird stuff started on the second night. I had spent most of the day hiking a dry trail that looped up into a slot canyon and spit you out near an old sandstone arch. The sky had been that cloudless, brittle blue that only happens in the high desert. I didn't see anyone the whole time, just the tracks of a jackrabbit, a hawk circling above, and a couple of scorpions scuttling in the shade of rocks. When I made it back to camp around 5, the sun was already low, and the wind had picked up. Something felt off when I got back. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. My gear was exactly where I'd left it. Tent zipped, cooler latched, folding chair flipped down on its side like I'd done that morning. But the silence had changed. It was thicker, still but not peaceful, like something holding its breath. I shrugged it off. Maybe I was just tired. I boiled some water for dehydrated chili, ate it with a plastic spoon, then tossed the pouch into the trash bag I'd strung between 2 sticks. As the sun dipped behind the cliffs, the cold set in quick. I threw on a thermal and started a fire, crackled and popped like it should, but even that sound felt like it didn't belong. I kept glancing over my shoulder. Nothing there, just the shadows creeping longer. By 9, the fire had burned low, and I was nodding off in my chair. I didn't want to sleep outside, so I crawled into my tent and zipped it shut. I lay there for a long time, listening. The wind had died down completely, which usually meant colder temperatures overnight. But there was something else. Footsteps. They weren't heavy, more like crunching twigs and shifting pebbles. Not constant either. They would come in short bursts, stop for a minute or two, then start again. At first, I figured it might be a deer. They're not uncommon around those parts, especially in the fall. But these steps didn't sound right. They were too careful, deliberate, like someone trying not to be heard. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to poke my head out. The fire was just embers. Nothing moved. I scanned the area with the beam. My eyes caught something near the edge of the rocks. A shape just low enough to the ground that it didn't match anything natural. I froze. It looked like a man crouched low, but his posture was wrong. His limbs were too long, elbows higher than they should have been, like a spider that stood on its back legs. His head snapped toward me before I even finished the thought, and I ducked back inside the tent, heart slamming against my ribs. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, clutching my flashlight in one hand and my pistol in the other. No more sounds came. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing, just shadows playing tricks or a stray coyote moving weird. When I finally fell asleep, it was because exhaustion dragged me under. The next morning, I found prints near the edge of camp. Not boot prints, bare feet, human but too large. Each toe visible in the fine dust, the heel slightly deeper than it should have been, like whoever left them was carrying weight on their back or didn't walk quite right. I thought about packing up then and there, but I had one more night before I planned to leave, and a part of me didn't want to give in to what could have just been nerves. I spent the day close to camp, keeping the fire going and sticking near the rocks where I could see in every direction. I didn't hike, I didn't wander, I just stayed put. When night came, I built the fire bigger than before. I dragged some extra wood into the ring and lit it early. I even made a torch by wrapping a torn rag around a stick and soaking it with fuel from my stove bottle. I had the pistol sitting right next to me now, loaded, safety off. The night passed slow, real slow. By 10, I started to hear the noises again. Steps, faint and spread out. I didn't bother with the flashlight this time. I just sat there and stared into the dark, waiting. At one point, I saw movement beyond the wash. A figure, tall and thin, moved from one boulder to another. No sound, no hesitation, just smooth, slow motion. I stood up, raised the torch, and lit it with the fire. The flame bloomed fast, and I waved it above my head like a warning. That's when the sound changed. Something let out this low, guttural groan, not an animal sound. It had a rhythm to it, almost like language, but distorted and broken. It didn't sound angry or wild. It sounded curious, like someone practicing a word for the first time. I backed toward the tent, holding the torch in one hand and the pistol in the other. I didn't sleep that night, not even a minute. The figure never came close again. It stayed on the edge of the wash, pacing and crouching, always moving, but never fully entering the light. When dawn came, it was gone. I broke camp in record time, tossed everything into the pack, didn't bother folding the tent or dousing the fire. I just kicked sand over the embers and hiked back to the truck with my pistol still drawn. The air smelled different on the way out, metallic, sour. My skin itched the whole hike. When I reached the truck, I turned the key and floored it without looking back. The road was rough, but I didn't care. I just wanted out. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw for a long time, mostly because I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. I still don't, but I've thought about it a lot over the years. I don't believe in skinwalkers in the way people tell stories. I don't believe in magic or shapeshifters or curses. What I believe is this: there are people out there who don't live by the rules we know. People who've learned how to move like animals, how to survive off-grid without being seen. Maybe they were born that way. Maybe they chose it. Doesn't matter. What matters is they're real. I don't go camping alone anymore. Haven't since that trip. I still love the desert. I still believe in the quiet. But I also believe in being watched. And once you know what that feels like, truly feels like, it never leaves you. I keep a laminated photo of those footprints in my toolbox. Just one shot I snapped with my phone before I packed up that last morning. I don't show it to anyone. I just keep it there to remind myself that the stories we hear as kids aren't always made up. Sometimes they're warnings, and sometimes they're right. It was the summer of 2019 when I decided to go on a solo camping trip in western Montana. I had just turned 32, and things had been getting too noisy in my head. Work stress, apartment noise, the nonstop grind of city life in Boise. I needed silence. I needed to hear nothing but the wind through trees and water lapping at a shoreline. So I packed up my Ford Escape with a tent, sleeping gear, enough canned food and jerky to last 4 days, and my fishing rod. I left early on a Thursday morning and drove north through the mountain roads, turning off my phone once I passed Missoula. The spot I picked wasn't a designated campground. I found it 2 years earlier when hiking with a friend. It was a small clearing near Lake Ruth, about 3 miles from the nearest dirt road and surrounded by dense pine forest. The lake was mostly unknown except to a few locals and hunters. No cell service, no visitors, and no man-made sounds. I parked the SUV on the edge of the nearest trail, grabbed my backpack, and hiked in. The air was clear and cool, smelling like wet moss and pine needles. The sun cut through the tall trees, flashing gold as it hit the dirt path ahead of me. I reached the clearing around 11 a.m. The trees opened up to a flat, grassy patch a few dozen feet from the edge of the lake. The water shimmered blue, barely moving, except when the occasional trout jumped. I set up my tent at the far end of the clearing, where the ground was level and soft. I laid out my sleeping bag and gear inside, then stashed my food in a bear canister and hid it under a log about 30 feet away. I had brought a small gas stove, but I also built a fire pit with rocks just in case I felt like making a real fire. The first day was peaceful. I cast my fishing line out into the lake, caught 2 decent-sized trout, and cooked one up for dinner on the stove. I sat on a folding stool near the water and watched the sunset turn the lake orange and purple. Felt good to be away. That night, I lay in my tent with the fly open, watching the stars blink into view one by one. No city lights, no engine noise, no voices. Just me, my breath, and the forest. I woke up once in the night, around 2 a.m., to the sound of branches cracking in the woods. It wasn't alarming. Animals move at night, but it sounded heavier than a raccoon or deer. I lay still for a while, listening. Whatever it was, it moved slowly, branches snapping one at a time. Not like a bear rummaging for food, but more like deliberate steps. Eventually, the sound faded. I told myself it was probably a moose or maybe just a few loose branches falling from the wind. I didn't hear anything else until the birds started up just before dawn. The second day, I hiked the trails around the lake. I brought my compass and a small map I had drawn from my last trip. I walked around the west side of the lake, where thick trees and undergrowth made the going slow. I saw a fox dart through the brush, a hawk overhead, and some fresh deer prints near a muddy bank. It was perfect, exactly what I wanted. I took my time getting back, returning to camp around 3 p.m. I noticed a few things were different when I got back. My firewood pile had been knocked over. Nothing was missing, and it didn't look like anything had been chewed, just scattered. I thought maybe an animal had messed with it. I checked the bear canister, still there, still sealed, but the log I had covered it with had rolled a bit farther than I remembered. That was strange. I brushed it off. Probably some strong gusts or maybe a curious raccoon. I cleaned up, made some soup, and sat by the water again. I didn't fish that evening, just watched the surface and listened. But the silence didn't feel the same. There was a pressure to it, like something was holding its breath. That night, I didn't sleep as soundly. I kept hearing noises, sticks snapping, light rustling through the dry pine needles. Once I heard what sounded like a soft footstep just outside my tent. I held my breath and stared up at the tent ceiling. I didn't move, didn't sit up, just waited. After a while, it went quiet again. When I finally drifted off, it was nearly dawn. On the third morning, I woke up with a weird feeling. I unzipped the tent and saw something that stopped me cold. About 20 feet from the tent, at the edge of the clearing, a tree had deep knife marks in its bark. For vertical slashes, uneven but deliberate, fresh. I had a gut reaction, that sharp cold punch in the stomach. No animal did that. I walked over, crouched, and looked closer. It was made with a blade. A knife, maybe a machete. Not super clean cuts, but definite human marks. I looked around the clearing. Everything else seemed normal. My gear was untouched. No footprints, no sign of anyone. But I knew someone had been there. Maybe while I was out hiking the day before. Maybe while I was sleeping. I took my knife from my pack and kept it in my pocket. I kept looking into the woods, expecting to see someone standing there. But the trees gave nothing back. Still and quiet. I thought about leaving right then, packing everything up and hiking back to the car. But it was a long hike, and it would take time to get to the nearest town. Part of me felt like I was overreacting. Maybe a hunter came through and marked the tree for some reason. Maybe it was old and I just hadn't noticed it before. I told myself that. I forced myself to stay calm. That day I stayed close to camp. Didn't hike, just gathered more firewood and kept a close eye on the tree-line. I didn't fish. I didn't sit by the water. I didn't want to turn my back to the woods. I cooked quickly and cleaned up everything afterward. I even dug a small trench around the tent, just in case it rained. Anything to stay busy. That night was the worst. I lay awake in the tent, knife in hand, flashlight next to me. Around midnight, I heard it. Soft footfalls in the leaves. Not an animal, not a bear. Too light, but too steady to be random. I held my breath and listened. The steps came closer, stopped. Then I heard something zip, like a zipper. My blood ran cold. I grabbed the flashlight and knife and sat up. I didn't turn the light on yet. I just waited, ears straining. No more sounds. Minutes passed. Then, finally, I heard a faint rustling near where the bear canister was. Then silence again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Just sat up, barely blinking, waiting for something else. Nothing came. When the sun started to rise, I crawled out and walked around the site. The bear canister was there, but it had been moved again, about 10 feet away from where I had left it. Still sealed, but it was clear someone had tried to open it. There were fresh scuff marks on it, like it had been handled roughly. And then I saw the footprints. Not boots, not hiking shoes, bare feet, human, adult-sized, slightly dirty, pressed into the soft dirt near the edge of the woods. That was enough. I packed everything as fast as I could. Tent, sleeping bag, gear, all of it. I didn't care about organizing or weight balance. I just threw it in the pack, grabbed the canister, and started moving. I didn't eat. I didn't stop to fill my water bottle. I just walked. Fast. The trail back felt longer than 3 miles. Every noise made my head snap around. Every squirrel, every breeze in the trees. I expected to see someone behind me every time I looked back. But no one was there. When I finally saw the SUV, parked and half covered in pine needles, I almost broke into a run. I tossed my gear in the back, locked the doors, and started the engine. The road out was rough, full of switchbacks and potholes, but I didn't care. I drove fast. By the time I hit cell service again, I had 15 missed notifications and a full battery. I didn't check any of them. I just kept driving. I didn't report anything. Who would I report it to? I wasn't on a marked campsite. No one saw anything. I had no proof, just a few footprints and some carved bark. I told myself it was a squatter or a drifter, maybe a hunter who got too close. But the truth is, someone was watching me out there. Someone who got close to my camp while I slept. Someone who didn't leave any gear, any sound, any trail. Just marks, just silence. I haven't been camping alone since. Sometimes I still think about those nights. The way the air felt too still. The way I felt like I was being watched. I've camped with friends since then, near towns, near other people, but never alone, never again. I still love the woods. I still love the quiet, but now I know that quiet can hide things. Things that don't make noise when they move. Things that stand just outside the edge of the firelight. That trip changed the way I look at solitude. It reminded me that we're not the only ones who like to be alone out there. And some people, whoever they are, aren't just passing through. They're watching, waiting, and they don't make a sound. It was the end of September in 2019, and the days were just starting to feel shorter. My wife, Megan, and I had been talking for a while about getting away from the city for a weekend. Just the two of us, no phones, no work. We both worked in software, long days, late nights, too many screens. Megan found this place online. A small, forested park area about 3 hours out of Boise, Idaho. It wasn't a big national park or anything. Just a quiet forest area with a few official campsites along a dirt road that barely showed up on Google Maps. She liked that it wasn't crowded. I liked that it was cheap. We left early on a Friday morning. Our SUV was packed tight with everything: tent, sleeping bags, a small camping stove, canned food, flashlights, even bear spray. We weren't totally new to camping, but we weren't seasoned experts either. We'd done a few weekend trips over the years, but nothing off the grid like this. The idea of not having any cell service felt like a relief. The drive was easy for the first 2 hours, just highways and scenic roads. The last hour, though, was bumpy. Once we hit the dirt road, the trees got thicker, and we barely saw another car. Megan was watching the GPS closely, but even that started to lag. Eventually, we passed a faded wooden sign that just said, Mill Creek Camp, in chipping white paint. That was our place. There were only 4 or 5 actual campsites in the area, all spaced out pretty far. Ours was tucked back near a slope, surrounded by tall pines and brush. You couldn't see the other campsites from where we were. That's exactly what Megan wanted: peace, quiet, space. We set up the tent quickly. It was already close to 4 by the time we got everything in place. The sun was filtering through the trees, and the forest had this calming sound to it, like a low hush. The breeze would pick up every now and then and make the pines whistle gently. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that kind of quiet until we were surrounded by it. That first evening was relaxing. We cooked a simple dinner, sat by the fire, and just unwound. The stars came out clear and sharp, and we fell asleep easily. No problems at all. The second day was when things started to feel off. It was small at first. Around mid-morning, we hiked one of the nearby trails. It wasn't marked, just a narrow footpath that cut through the brush and curved up toward a ridge. We went about 2 miles before turning back. On the way back down, we found what looked like a freshly snapped tree branch lying across the trail. Not that weird on its own, but it hadn't been there earlier when we passed through. It looked clean-cut, too, not wind-snapped, not rotting, like it had just been broken off and dropped. I shrugged it off. Megan did too. Still, we both felt a little more aware of the sounds around us after that. I started to notice how quiet everything was, like really quiet.
No birds, no rustling.
Just whined through the trees. That should have been peaceful, but it felt empty, like the woods were holding their breath. Back at camp, I noticed boot prints near our fire pit. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. They weren't ours. We had hiking shoes with a different tread. These were larger, heavier, and came from the direction opposite the trail. The dirt was soft enough that I could see where someone had stood for a bit before walking back the way they came. Megan thought maybe they were from someone else camping nearby, just wandering through. But we hadn't seen anyone. Not one person since we arrived. I even checked with the small registration box at the start of the park. No one else had signed in for the weekend. I didn't say anything to her about that part. I didn't want to make her nervous. We still had 1 night to go. That night, I didn't sleep well. It wasn't loud or stormy or anything like that. It was the opposite. I kept waking up because I thought I heard something move outside. Not walking or anything obvious, just small sounds. like something brushing against the outside of the tent or stepping carefully through the brush. I held my breath for a long time, waiting for whatever it was to go away. Eventually, I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer. The next morning, we found something strange. Our camp chair, the fold-up one I had left by the fire pit, was gone. Not knocked over, gone. We looked around, thinking maybe the wind blew it or something dragged it, but we couldn't find it. Not even drag marks. It wasn't far from the tent, and I'm a light sleeper. I didn't hear anything. Neither did Megan. That was the moment we both felt it, like something wasn't right. We decided to pack up early. I didn't say anything out loud, but I felt like we were being watched. It's hard to describe. Just this prickling in the back of my neck that wouldn't go away. Megan didn't argue. She packed fast. As I was loading up the last bag, I noticed something further into the woods, maybe 50 feet out from our campsite. There was a flash of color, something orange. I walked toward it slowly. It was the backrest from our camp chair. It had been torn off and tossed against a tree. Just that part. The metal frame was nowhere to be seen. No sign of animals.
No scratches.
Just like someone had taken it, removed the fabric, and left it there. That was enough for me. We left. The road out felt longer than the road in. Every tree felt like it was hiding someone. Every shadow looked like it was moving. I kept checking the rearview mirror for signs of movement behind us. Nothing. We got back to the main road around noon and stopped at a diner. There was this relief that hit both of us as soon as we stepped inside. Like we were safe again. It's weird how fast you can go from calm to on edge in a place like that. I didn't say much over lunch. Neither did Megan. It felt like we were trying to forget it already. Back home, I kept thinking about those boot prints, the chair, the silence, and that feeling like we weren't alone. I started to wonder if someone had been watching us the whole time, staying just far enough out of view to not get caught. Maybe they were hiding in the woods, following us quietly. Maybe they wanted to scare us. Or maybe it was worse than that. The part that stuck with me most, though, was how careful everything seemed. That chair wasn't taken by an animal. It wasn't random. Someone came into our campsite during the night, took it, and placed the torn part far enough away that we wouldn't see it right away. Like they wanted us to know they'd been there without actually seeing them. We never reported it. What would we even say? No crime was committed. No one was hurt. Just a lot of weird, quiet signs that someone else was there with us, just outside our vision, waiting. We haven't been camping since. I still have the rest of the chair, the fabric part we found. I kept it in the garage for a while, thinking maybe I'd throw it away. But something about it made me keep it. It's up on a shelf now, folded and dusty. Every once in a while, I look at it and wonder who took it, why they left it behind like that, what they were planning, or if they were just playing some strange, silent game that we didn't know we were part of. And I'm just glad we left when we did. I was 24 that year, just out of a rough winter in Oslo, and in a weird place in life. I had no steady job, just part-time delivery gigs. My girlfriend had moved out of our shared apartment 3 weeks earlier, and most of my friends were either too busy or too far away to hang out. I had this feeling I needed to get out of the city for a while. Not for vacation, just to clear my head. Something quiet. Alone. I remembered a place about 2 hours from the city, where my uncle used to take me as a kid. It was near the edge of a small village called Valen, by the woods. There was this old graveyard, completely forgotten, right in the middle of a clearing. It wasn't a big graveyard, just 30 or 40 graves, most of them from the early 1900s. Overgrown, cracked stones, rusted iron fencing. Last time I had seen it, it looked abandoned. I thought it would be the perfect place to be alone. Nobody would go out there, and it was surrounded by forest on all sides. I packed my tent, a sleeping bag, some food, my small gas burner, a water jug, flashlight, power bank, a knife, and my thermal jacket. I left on a Friday morning in late September. The train took me to the nearest stop, then I had to walk about 6 kilometers. The village was quiet, barely any shops. I grabbed some extra water and snacks there, then headed into the woods. It was cold for September. The air had that damp bite to it, like it had rained early in the morning. The sun was out, but it didn't do much to warm the forest. I followed a narrow path that wasn't really a trail anymore, just broken traces of old dirt where people used to walk. After about an hour, I saw the first signs of the graveyard. A piece of the old iron fence stuck out from under some moss, twisted and rusting. The whole area looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe because I was bigger now. Grass had grown wild over everything. Some headstones had sunk into the soil. Others were cracked down the middle. One had fallen and split into 2 pieces. The names on them were all in faded old script. Anderson, Johann, 1912, 1898, and so on. I walked around the edges of it, checking the layout. There were a few trees near the center, pine and birch, and a dry, open spot just outside the gate where I decided to pitch my tent. The sun was already dipping low when I finished setting up. I made a quick dinner, boiled pasta and canned meat, and sat on a rock eating while staring at the graveyard. I didn't feel scared, just quiet. No wind, no birds, nothing but the occasional rustle in the leaves. Around 7:30 p.m., the sun dropped behind the trees. It got cold fast. I zipped up my jacket and sat on the edge of my sleeping bag, reading something off my phone until the battery dropped below 30%. I turned it off, clicked on the flashlight, and decided to walk around a little more before getting in the tent. The air smelled like damp leaves and soil. My breath fogged up in front of me. As I stepped around the graves, I noticed something I hadn't seen earlier. Near the far end of the cemetery, the ground sloped downward a bit, and there was what looked like a broken stone path leading away into thicker trees. I followed it a few meters, but it was hard to see with just the flashlight. After 20 or 30 feet, the stones disappeared into mud. I turned back and walked to my tent, zipped myself in, and lay down. The silence hit me hard. I could hear every creak in the forest, every twig cracking. Somewhere nearby, a fox screamed, sharp and sudden. I jolted up, heart thumping, stopped right away. I knew what it was, but being alone out there made it feel different. I lay back down and tried to sleep. I kept waking up. Every hour, sometimes from sounds, sometimes from the cold. At around 2:40 a.m., I woke to something else. A metallic clink, very faint, not close but not far either. I froze, listened, nothing. Then again, clink. I slowly unzipped the tent, pushed the flap open, and peeked out. It was pitch dark, except for the narrow beam of my flashlight. I swept it across the graveyard. Everything looked the same, but I saw something that made me sit still. One of the headstones that had been flat on the ground earlier now looked like it was standing upright. I stared at it for a long time. Maybe I was remembering wrong. Maybe I hadn't looked at that exact one. I told myself it was nothing. I zipped the tent back up, but I didn't sleep again. By morning, the ground was wet from dew. I got out, walked over to the headstone. It was broken in half, standing part stuck at an angle. Probably shifted from the cold or something. But still, I was uneasy. I made coffee on my gas burner and warmed my hands on the mug. I decided to walk the path I'd found the night before, the one with the broken stones. I followed it deeper this time, past the muddy patch. It curved slightly and led to a clearing with the remains of what looked like an old cabin. Just the stone foundation was left. A few wooden beams were scattered nearby, half buried in moss. Inside the foundation was a pit, maybe 4 feet deep, full of leaves and broken glass. I didn't go in, just stood above it, flashlight scanning the inside. Something shiny caught my eye. I stepped down carefully and pulled it out. An old rusted padlock. Nearby was what looked like a crushed tin container.
No markings.
I climbed out and stood there, thinking, why would a cabin be this close to a graveyard? Maybe the caretaker used to live here, or someone else. I walked back to my tent. That afternoon, I read, napped a little, then walked around the area again. Nothing strange happened, but at night, around 11 p.m., I heard a noise that didn't fit the forest. It was like someone dragging something heavy over grass. I shot up, grabbed my flashlight and knife, and crouched low inside the tent. The sound came from the side, near the graves. I unzipped the flap slowly. My flashlight beam shook in my hand. I scanned the graves. Nothing. But then I saw it. Fresh dirt. Maybe 2 meters from the edge of the cemetery. Like something had been dug and filled in again. It hadn't been there before. I didn't sleep. I sat in the tent with my back against my bag, knife in hand. The sounds didn't come back. Just silence again. In the morning, I went straight to the patch of dirt. It was fresh.
No grass, no roots.
I poked it with a stick. The soil was soft. Something had definitely been dug there. I didn't want to dig it up myself, but I knew I couldn't ignore it either. I marked the spot with a stick and a piece of orange cloth from my tent bag, then packed up everything. I hiked back to the village, reached the small station, and called the local police from a payphone outside a grocery store. I didn't give them too many details, just said I found disturbed ground near old graves and thought they should look at it. They said someone would check. I didn't go back to Oslo right away. I stayed in a cheap hostel near the coast that night, trying to shake the feeling from my chest. It wasn't fear anymore. It was unease, like I had been close to something I wasn't supposed to see. 2 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was a man with a thick Norwegian accent saying they had investigated the graveyard and found evidence of recent digging. They were still looking into it, but thanked me for reporting it. Nothing more. I never heard anything else. No follow-up. No news reports. I didn't go camping again for over a year after that. When I did, I stayed close to other people. No more graveyards. No more forgotten paths. The thing that stuck with me wasn't the fear. It was the silence. The kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for something. And I still wonder sometimes, who was out there with me that night? And what were they digging? I was 31 the summer I decided to drive across southern France on my own. It was 2019, early June, and I'd just taken unpaid leave from work. I was burnt out, sick of my office job in Leeds, tired of seeing the same walls, the same rain, the same faces. I wanted something quiet, open, and far away. I had this used Renault Kangoo van I bought off a friend's uncle. I fitted a basic mattress in the back, a camping stove, some crates with canned food, and drove it through Dover into Calais. My plan was to move slowly south through the countryside, stopping at small towns, forests, and parks to sleep. I didn't want hotels. I didn't want people. Most nights I stayed at official campgrounds or quiet rest areas just outside towns. Sometimes I parked off back roads when it felt safe. I kept to the rules. Park late, leave early, and don't leave trash. I used offline maps, marked water sources, and made sure my phone was charged. I wasn't careless. I just wanted stillness. That's how I ended up near a village called Lorette, west of Montpellier, 3 weeks into the trip. Lorette wasn't on the map as anything notable. No tourist spots, no historic markers, no restaurants people blogged about. I found it because of a detour. I had meant to head toward Lodov but took a wrong turn at a junction with a broken road sign. The GPS rerouted me, and I followed an old D road through farmland and low hills until I passed a faded sign for Lorette, 3 kilometers. I almost drove past it, but there was a flat clearing about half a kilometer past the sign, near a cluster of trees and a slow-running creek. The ground was dry but level. I parked the van under some shade. It was still light out, and I planned to make a quick dinner, read, and sleep early. There was no cell signal, but I wasn't worried. I had water and fuel, and the van was in good condition. I was used to being off the grid by then. It was warm. Cicadas buzzed in the grass. The creek ran quietly over smooth stones behind a thin curtain of trees. I boiled water for pasta, chopped some dried sausage, and ate leaning against the back door with my shoes off. Everything smelled like dry dirt and pine needles. I didn't see a house or a car the whole evening. I thought I'd found the perfect place to spend the night. By the time the sun started going down, the sky turned a soft peach, and I got out to brush my teeth and take a walk along the creek. I left the van unlocked. I didn't bring my phone or flashlight. The creek was maybe 30 meters from the van. Just a slow trickle over rocks, some frogs in the reeds. I walked up its bank for 5 minutes, following the way it curved slightly uphill and then widened into a deeper basin, almost like a shallow pool. There were smooth slabs of rock around it, worn down like people or animals used to rest there. I stood for a while and watched the water swirl slowly, and then I saw him. He was maybe 50 meters up the slope, half behind a thin tree, far enough that I couldn't see his face, but close enough that I knew he was watching me. He wasn't moving. He wasn't walking or doing anything natural. He was just standing completely still, like a shadow pinned to the tree. I could make out the shape of his arms, the dark outline of pants and a jacket, something bulky around his waist like a pack or belt. I didn't panic. Not yet. I just turned around and started walking back the way I came. Not fast, but deliberate. I didn't look back. My heart started going faster. I knew he hadn't said anything. He hadn't moved. But the way he was standing, rigid, deliberate, out of place, it wasn't right. He was too far into the woods to just be wandering. And no one just stands like that. When I got back to the van, I shut the doors quietly and locked them. I sat in the driver's seat and listened. The sun had dipped low now, and the shadows were stretching across the clearing. I still didn't have service. I waited. I didn't turn on any lights. I just sat there, eyes on the rearview mirror, the side windows, the edge of the woods. Nothing happened for about half an hour. Then I saw something move at the far end of the clearing, just a blur between the trees, a darker shape shifting slightly. I held my breath. The van was locked, the engine off, and I was down in the seat. Maybe he didn't see me. Maybe he had gone back. I waited longer. Still nothing. But later that night, sometime after midnight, I don't know exactly when, I heard the crunch of footsteps on dry grass. Not an animal, not wind. Slow human steps, deliberate, dragging slightly. I didn't breathe. I stayed perfectly still. I had a small utility knife in the crate behind the seat. I reached for it quietly. The footsteps circled the van once. I heard the faint brush of something against the back panel. Then silence. Then a soft thud near the rear door. I stayed awake the rest of the night, heart pounding so hard I felt sick. I didn't dare look out. I didn't want to show movement. I gripped the knife so tight my palm ached. By morning, the clearing was quiet again. I unlocked the door slowly and stepped out. My legs were shaking. There were footprints in the dirt, boot prints large, going around the van once. A set stopped at the rear door and then walked off toward the tree line. I followed them 20 meters in, and they disappeared into the thicker undergrowth. That was enough. I wasn't going to stay another second. I packed everything fast, tossed my stove and mat back into the van without organizing anything, and started the engine. I didn't eat. I didn't brush my teeth. I didn't even change clothes. I drove straight back to the main road, taking turns without checking maps, just heading in the direction of light and open space until I reached a gas station with people, phones, and signal. I parked and sat there for almost 2 hours. That should have been the end of it. But a week later, after I'd already moved further south and stayed at a proper campground near Béziers, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. I was reorganizing the crates in the back of the van, restocking from a supermarket run, and I noticed my water container was missing. Not empty, gone. I also noticed my old spare shoes, which I kept in a bin under the bed, were gone too. At first, I thought I had just forgotten them. Maybe I left them by the creek. But I never brought that crate out of the van. Then I saw a long, thin scratch down the inside of the rear door, right where the lock was. Not deep, but fresh. It wasn't there before Lorette. He had tried to get in. Maybe he even did. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know why he left. But I know he was real. I finished my trip early after that. I stayed in real campgrounds, places with other people, places with fences and streetlights. I cut the whole route short and crossed back to the UK 2 weeks ahead of schedule. I still have that van, parked at my mum's place in Yorkshire. I haven't slept in it since. I looked up Lorette when I got home. Nothing came up on Google. No population records. No photos. Just one blurry entry on an outdated map service from 2004. I even tried satellite view, just trees, fields, and an old road that looked more like a trail. Sometimes I wonder if he was from there, or maybe just passing through like me. But the way he stood, the way he watched, the way he circled the van, it wasn't random. He wasn't lost. He wasn't curious. He was waiting, and I'll never go back.